I used to see Star Control ranked up there with the greatest games of all time. It felt like anyone who was PC gaming in the 90s had at least heard of it, but these days it feels like it's fallen out of the public consciousness. There's a lot of competition these days, and not a lot of room for old genre-defining classics, it seems. And yet, with a true new entry in the series set to release nearly 33 years after the last one, it seems like it's a good time to take a look back at the whole series with all its ups and its downs. I'm sure a lot of you know which Star Control I'm talking about when I say Star Control, but it's important to start at the beginning. Thankfully, you can just buy the first Star Control, but the Steam version has this horrible filter over it. Okay, I try to be tolerant of all sorts of opinions, but if you genuinely think interpolating pixel art looks better, I'm sorry, we simply can't be friends. Thankfully, the GOG version was unadulterated, and you know it's old because it still has this copy protection screen from back when you could prevent piracy simply by asking a question from the manual. The music is some classic DOS brapcore. If you've played enough, you know what I'm talking about. It's a step above the basic PC beeper that used to jump scare me as a kid. Synthesized audio like this came from the chip itself instead of speakers, and I believe this one is the ad-lib, but anyway, I'm getting off topic. I never played this back in the day, so it took me a while to figure out how to set the opponent to a computer, but after that I can choose any of the available scenarios. Star Control's genesis was towards the end of the 80s when Paul Ricci III pitched the idea for a game that blended both sci-fi and strategy to a relatively young game company called Electronic Arts. Already an industry veteran at the time and having helped develop the first game ever published by EA, he wanted to make something all his own this time. His pitch was turned down, but as luck would have it, one of the producers he'd previously worked with had recently moved to another company called Accolade, which had splintered off from Activision after the video game crash of '83. She secured the deal for him, but now he was on the hook for a new game, and the price of independence meant he was now without a team. His friend Greg Johnson would see his predicament and think of another friend of his. Fred Ford began his career in the early 80s programming a variety of Japanese titles for a company called Magicsoft. The company's untimely demise led him to seek the security of a more conventional corporate job, but after a few years he asked himself, why was he doing what he thought he should be doing and not what he wanted to be doing? So with a programmer looking to get back into games and a developer looking for a programmer, Greg Johnson invited them both to his house for one of his board game nights, and somewhere along the lines they teamed up to create a company called Toys for Bob. The concept for Star Control is based heavily on one of Paul's earlier creations called Archon. Archon was a chess-like strategy game from 1984. You move pieces around a grid, but unlike chess, when two pieces collide, they're thrown into a battle screen. Something like a pawn would be much weaker than a queen, but importantly, it was still possible for the pawn to win. This asymmetrical battle system was so integral to Star Control's design that they used to joke that StarCon was just Archon with st in front of it. The game field is made of a map of rotating stars. It looks like something out of the demo scene, and this sort of visual trickery and 3D playing field would have been fairly impressive back in the day. To play, you simply move your ships from star to star. Any action costs an action point, and once you've used all three, it's your opponent's turn. Moving on to an unknown star will explore it and tell you if it's a life world, green, a mineral world, purple, or a dead world, gray. While a ship is on top of a life world, you can spend an action to colonize it. After 2 turns, you'll have a colony. You can spend an action at colonies to refuel any crew you might have lost in battle, and moving from a colony doesn't cost any action points, making them extremely powerful for controlling territory. On mineral worlds, you can set up mines that provide 1 Starbuck each turn as soon as they're established. Additionally, you can fortify all 3 world types to prevent enemy ships from being able to pass until it's been sieged, which is very useful for locking down choke points. You can also occasionally find useful artifacts from an alien race called the Precursors. Starbucks are used at the star base to buy more ships. There's 7 options, each costing more than the last. I'm playing as the hierarchy, so my options are the Umgod Drone, the Spathi Discriminator, the Androsynth Guardian, the Vux Intruder, the Ilroth Avenger, the Mycon Podship, and the Urquan Dreadnought. Importantly, I don't have access to any of the Alliance ships, and so there's no truly balanced matchups. When 2 or more opposing ships end a turn on the same star, they enter combat. If you want to know all this, you need to look it up in the manual first, because having instructions in the game is a waste of precious disk space. Floppy disk space. The combat in Star Control is based heavily on Space War, which would have been retro even in the late 80s. You only have forward thrust as well as turning, so maneuvering can be quite troublesome, especially if you want to slow down. Turning and aiming can be difficult due to the limited number of angles your ship can actually face, which makes lining up your shots quite the art. Your health is represented by crew, and your energy is fuel. You expend energy to do an attack, and it recharges over time, so you can't just spam it. Each ship has different handling characteristics like speed, turn rate, and range, but the biggest difference is weaponry. Each ship has a main and a special attack. The Urquan Dreadnought has a devastating plasma blast and can send out some of its crew as fighters, capable of harrying any nearby ships. At 30 Starbucks, it's the hierarchy's most powerful ship. Shofixty scouts don't stand a chance, and neither do the Arilu. While it can be slow to turn, the fighters will take out any close-range ships with ease. However, the Dreadnought can lose quite handily to something as cheap as the Alliance's Earthling cruiser with its long-range homing nukes. It's difficult for the Urquan to close the distance, and while the Earthlings can get blasted apart in seconds if they're too close, as long as they keep their distance, there's not much you can do. It's a similar story for the Alliance's most expensive ship, the Chenjesu Broodhome. The crystalline entities can shoot out any amount of exploding crystals from their back, meaning it can attack while fleeing, and with its long range and large health pool, it's extremely difficult to take one out with slower ships. Instead, just like how the cheaper Earthlings can take out a Dreadnought, the Chenjesu will have a difficult time fending off the Androsynth and their ability to turn into a blazing comet before ducking away to recharge. By the way, the Androsynth were conceived by the thought of what it would look like if Diva was flying a spaceship. That being said, these are just advantages, and are by no means a guarantee of victory either way. This asymmetric battle system adds another layer on the strategy, because the most expensive unit isn't always the best, and that forces you to consider what ships to build based on what your opponent has, as well where to move them to make them most effective. Really though, the best part is this little view of the pilot for each of the ships. Outside the battles, it's your standard territory capture game, but the ability to beat the death by numbers through pure skill in the battles makes it an interesting and varied experience. Some pure strategy enthusiasts might dislike that their best laid plans could be thwarted by a single skilled Shofixty kamikaze taking out their Dreadnought, but it remains a unique approach to the genre, especially at the time. It's best played with 2 players, but the computer does a serviceable job in keeping it interesting. The campaign, as it were, is only a handful of starfields and scenarios that you can choose at any time. There's no true progression, and there's no reward for beating them all besides your own satisfaction. Outside of the game itself, though, Star Control's greatest strength is its textured setting and creative sincerity. The full name of Star Control is actually Star Control Famous Battles of the Urquan Conflict Volume 4, and it takes place between the defending Alliance of Free Stars and the enslaving Urquan hierarchy. Earth was contacted by the Chenjesu sometime during this conflict, and despite the fact that they were still primitive by space standards, the Alliance was forced to conscript humanity into helping them against the Urquan. This is all, of course, in the manual, but there's a lot of lore nestled in there between the controls and how to launch from DOS with the right VGA settings. You have the Umga, who see the whole conflict as more of a prolonged prank. The Vux joined the hierarchy only after meeting a human officer who unwittingly broadcast his immediate reaction to their appearance. And the Androsynth are a race of humanoid clones who rebelled and fled Earth after they were subjugated to cruel experiments and are now all too eager to exact revenge. There's a lot of depth attached to such a simple game, and I feel like this goes for any creative work, but I always like to feel like ideas were so replete that they had to be cut rather than stretched. It also allows us a glimpse at the minds making it, and let us feign ignorance of their later works and assume that this is all there is. Star Control was a remarkably imaginative strategy game, and while some critique the depth of the strategy or the thrown-together campaign, just as many players spent hours shoulder to shoulder with their friends sharing a keyboard trying to blast each other apart. The personality didn't fail to resonate with players, and the uniqueness and subtle humor of the aliens such as the Mernherm gave it a curious appeal. The game was a success, and while it couldn't quite compete with the juggernaut that was Ultima at the time, it was enough for Accolade to be interested in a sequel. Paul said in an interview that he told the publisher,
"We're just going to take the excellent things in Star Control 1, we're going to add some new alien races, this very light role-playing game, it won't be an epic story at all, don't worry, it's not going to take that long." And then once we got approved, pretty much ignored all of that.
If Star Control 1 was any indication, there was a lot they wanted to get out, and time was not on their side, because in June of 1992, almost 2 years after the release of their first game, Star Control 2 still wasn't done. They overshot their deadline, and even after cutting some planned features, there was still a lot of work left to be done. Accolade stopped paying them, and if not for Fred's prudent lifestyle, it may have never been finished at all. In the last 6 months of development, he personally covered all the company's costs. But in November of 1992, Star Control II finally released. The game takes place after the events of the Urquan conflict. You are part of an exploratory mission searching the stars for lost technology or anything that could aid in the war, and it seems you found just that, because beneath the surface of an unassuming planet was an enormous underground city. Unfortunately, before you could tell anyone of your discovery, the Urquan and their races of battle thralls cut off all connection with Earth. 20 years passed without word from Earth, but in that time the researchers discovered that the city houses a factory created by the Precursors capable of making ships unlike any other. After building a Precursor vessel, you're tasked with reconnecting with Earth and discovering the fate of the war. You're introduced to the Solar System map, and already this is a far departure from the fragmented missions of the first game. When you approach Earth, you're confronted by a drone.
Attention, interloper. Heed this recorded message.
The Alliance lost, and the Urquan won. The powerful presence of the Urquan here immediately sets the tone for this game, and to this day I struggle to think up any villainous aliens in media with a stronger first impression.
This drone now leaves to inform the Urquan of your transgressions.
If you were expecting just another little strategy game, your expectations would have been blown wide open as you approach the station around Earth.
Attention unidentified space vessel. I am Starbase Commander Hayes of the slave planet Earth.
If it didn't hit you then, it never will. Systems are critical due to neglect, and so they can only assume that you're the hierarchy supply ship and beg you for help. The last one appeared 8 years ago, and as you talk, you learn about the slave shield. Suddenly, you understand the red glow around Earth, and realize that these are the only humans you will ever see. It's such a powerful opening that it raises the stakes sky high, but after that, it's off to Mercury. This is the tutorial of sorts. To help the starbase, you need to land on Mercury and collect some radioactive elements. There's fully implemented stars, planets, and moons, each with their own surface conditions and attributes. After entering the orbit of Mercury, you can scan it and send down a lander to collect materials. There's a few hazards to avoid, but as soon as your lander is full, you've got to return and send down another to get more. It costs fuel based on the planet's gravity each time, but as soon as you've got the goods, it's back to the station.
Our engineers can refit the energy cores. There, that's much better. Power ratings are climbing. Life support is coming back into the green. What the hell kind of ship is that? Just who are you, Captain?
With their reactor stabilized, they're free to scan you, and understandably, Hayes is a little surprised to see humans other than himself outside of the slave shield. Naturally, you want to rise up against the Urquan, but Hayes is skeptical. He tells you that if you can take out the base on the moon, he might consider it, and so that's your next task. You went down to collect minerals, but this is to introduce the surface combat, and that important structures can be on planets. Though when you find it, it's actually been abandoned a long time and only made to look like it was active. You can return, but if you were hoping to be able to avoid a fight, you're out of luck, because you're rudely interrupted.
Long-range sensors show a ship closing on this station fast. Captain, it's jamming our signal.
By the fetid breath of the Dark Twin Kazon, a human and an alien starship. How fascinating.
Meet the Ilroth. They're utterly pleasant to be around, as you can see. These guys worship Dogar and Kazon, their twin gods of evil and darkness. This fellow noticed the Urquan drone and thought to impress his masters by jumping the line.
And now, you die.
This introduces combat. For 1992, it's done an excellent job at introducing all the major elements of gameplay within the first 20 minutes. Unfortunately, this is as fast as I can turn, and it's a good thing that Avenger started off damaged, because we're pretty weak right now. After that splendid performance, Hayes no longer has any problems joining your cause. This opens up the ability to sell resources for currency, upgrade your ship, refuel, as well as purchase crew. Crew are still effectively your health, and unfortunately humans are in short supply. There are only 2,000 humans left outside the slave shield allowed by the Urquan, and so they'll become more and more scarce and more expensive the more you lose. It's a minor thing, but it really adds to the oppressive weight of the setting. You can talk to Hayes to get even more background information, and if you go through everything, it's almost 30 minutes of nothing but dialogue. It's optional, of course, but it does make it clear that this game isn't for those against reading. Also, just listen to that music. It's a far cry from the menu of Star Control 1. Though I've got to come clean, this isn't the original Earthling theme. This is. After that, you've got everything you need to know, and you're free to roam freely. From this point, there's nothing stopping you. It's just you and your ability to get somewhere. But before you get too excited, it's probably a good idea to start scavenging around for resources to sell so that you can upgrade your ship, because otherwise you're going to be bullied by probes. And we can do that in the background while we talk about the music. There are so many good and timeless tracks in this game, but there's actually multiple packs depending on the release. There's the original PC release, the 3DO release, which has a few changes, and the open source release in 2002. I used the Precursor mix in this playthrough. Which pack is best is a hotly contested topic amongst gamers. Some claim it's the original, while others say that that's just nostalgia. While there's a few which I prefer the original, overall I like the remixes. You can forward all complaints to my business email. It was after porting the original Star Control to the Sega Genesis that Fred and Paul started searching for a new digital sound format. Writing digitized music on the sound cards of yore was a nightmare, more akin to using a graphing calculator than composing music, and so they were eager to change. They were looking through the music of another 1992 release, Dune, and came across the .mod format. Modules were tracker formats popular throughout the late 80s and 90s, which you might know from the demo scene. They started looking into how they could play these things back. There was no internet as we know it back then, and in searching for a solution, they were able to stumble upon a piece of finished software. After reverse engineering a tracker through a language barrier, they were able to write their own mod player for Star Control. They had the software, but unfortunately they were lacking musicians. There just weren't a lot of people working with this format, and finding people who were was difficult. Many of them were outside the United States, and so desperate, running out of time, and with a budget of $2,000, they posted a contest onto a Usenet group. Despite probably being a breach of the rules, it garnered interest anyway, and drew in about 20 entries from all around the world. Keep in mind that this was 1992. They had to burn their mod files onto a floppy disk and then put that inside of an envelope and then mail it to them. There were 12 winners in total, and these weren't industry musicians, these were just some hobbyists and Amiga enthusiasts. All of this gave the game a distinctive style, and the soundtrack still holds up today. For the 2002 release, the Precursor mixes were later spearheaded by Riku Nuautajärvi, as well as some of the other original competition winners. And while the debate on which is the best is never ending, I'd say that they both still blow away most modern soundtracks. The game becomes a lot more manageable once you've gathered enough RU to fill out all your thrusters. It doesn't only affect you in combat, but navigating the star map as well, so it's a pretty big priority. Finally, you won't get bullied by the probes so much, because they are everywhere. If you try to converse with them, despite claiming to come in peace, the moment you're finished talking, they'll decide you'll be much more useful as base materials to make more probes. But infinitely self-replicating killer drones are the least of your worries. The actual resource gathering is simple, but effective enough as a gameplay element to not be a detriment. The different heat values, as well as the weather and tectonics which can kill your crew, does end up creating a risk-reward calculus. The value of the materials is shown by their color, and so it's up to you whether you want to risk a dangerous world. Weather is the absolute worst and will just zap your crew whenever it feels like it. Tectonics are the easiest to avoid, but you can't do anything about high heat. Commander Hayes tells you that the best materials are around large stars, and while that's technically true, if you follow his advice you'll get nothing but planets that are too hot to land on. You can land on them eventually, but that requires purchasing almost all the upgrades from the Melnorme.
Your crew will be substantially safer on hot worlds.
The Melnorme are strange aliens from outside of this quadrant of the galaxy in search of biological information. They'll pay you in credits that you can use to purchase upgrades, which results in this rather amusing situation where you start looking for planets with life on them just so you can land and shoot animals. The image of humans flying through the stars, finding life, and then immediately exterminating it to sell to aliens is both hilarious and horrifying, but eventually you'll have enough to buy all the upgrades that make the planet lander mostly immune to all hazards. This might sound like Star Control 2 is a rather dry game about flying from planet to planet so you can drive an RV over it, but all of this is just the glue. Once you get tired of strip mining every star around the solar system, you might finally decide to venture out into the great unknown. If you want to stand any chance against the Urquan, you're going to need allies. And if you fly around, it won't be too long before you encounter some.
Surprise and terror!
These green things are the Spathi, and they're technically your enemies. They're the most cowardly species in the galaxy, and so you might wonder why they're part of the hierarchy's battle thralls. Well, when they were initially subjugated, the Spathi were given the same choice the Urquan gives all their victims. They could join their battle thralls and retain some freedom, or choose fallow slavery and allow themselves to be locked behind an impenetrable shield so that they could never rise against the Urquan, symbolized by a white or black rod. The Spathi, in their excitement at the prospect of an impenetrable shield, accidentally allowed the wrong rod to end up with the Urquan, and not one for takebacks, they became battle thralls.
Sure, consider it done. Allies to the bitter end. Not.
They're supposed to kill you, but if you don't say anything, they won't say anything.
Can we keep this as a secret between the two of us? It's really rather embarrassing.
As soon as you've encountered an alien race, you'll see their territory appear on the star map, and discovering what else lies out there is the real meat of this game. It throws you into this vast expanse of nothing and tells you to find some way to save humanity. This kind of gameplay isn't for everyone, but the drive to learn more, meet more strange creatures, learn about them, and track down some sort of solution to the seemingly hopeless situation is the main driver of engagement. The planet charting and the combat mostly exists as a counterweight to the alien dialogues to keep them from becoming overwhelming. It's a big universe, but Commander Hayes will occasionally point you in the right direction, such as making you aware of the Zokfot Pick, a collective of 3 separate intelligent species from the same planet.
We are the Zokfot Pick. Make no hostile actions.
They've only just recently taken to the stars, and they're already searching for help. Their homeworld isn't necessarily under attack, so much as it's caught in the crossfire of some kind of conflict. You can head there, and some might wonder, if the Iroquois are so powerful and terrifying, why is it that I can just fly around all their territory without a problem? Redditors might think, so unrealistic, but the truth is, they're busy. If you talk to the Zokfot Pick, they will tell you that the Iroquois are locked in battle with some species called the Korah, and what's more, they're poised to lose by 2159. This might sound like a good thing, until you meet one of them.
We are the Urquan Korah. You will soon die. Make whatever rituals are necessary for your species.
Yeah, they look a lot like the Urquan, but not nearly as friendly, if such a thing were possible. This forces you to question things, because up until now you'd assumed that the Urquan were simply the antagonists, and they'll still attack you for your insubordination, but if you fight with them enough, they'll actually beg you to return to Earth.
If you interfere with us here, we may lose the doctrinal conflict with the Korah.
More specifically, they're talking pet will beg you, which are unthinking creatures that they use for the distasteful necessity of speaking with aliens. This conflict is the heart of Star Control 2, and if you talk to enough aliens, you'll eventually be able to put the pieces together. The Urquan Korah seek to exterminate all life, while the Urquan Kazersa seek only to subjugate it, and they're battling to see whose doctrine is superior as they've already done once before. As they're presented with all this information, it just makes you want to learn more and more, but the rest is scattered throughout the game. The Urquan had reached the stars thousands of years ago. Their race was territorial and solitary, and in their own words, civilization did not come to them easily. They reached the stars and encountered the Taelo, a powerful silicon-based race that wouldn't trigger their instinctive territoriality, and the only race that they would call their friends. They were invited to join the sentient milieu, and so they did. They worked with them for 3,000 years, preferring distant scouting missions due to their solitary nature, until one day they landed on a planet much like any other. But that planet was inhabited by a terrible race called the Dinyari. They possessed psychic powers of compulsion so complete that any exploring Urquan were immediately captured. They were compelled to return to their ships with the Dinyari on board. They unwillingly brought their captors to the heart of the milieu, and it was only a matter of days before every race was enslaved. The Urquan became their favorites, using them for all their dirty deeds as they grew to rule the galaxy unopposed. They tampered with their genes, splitting the Urquan into the thinking caste of green and the fighting caste of black. Thus, the Urquan lived in psychic slavery for almost 25,000 years. After so long, the Dinyari grew complacent, and allowed a singular Urquan named Kazersa to discover that they must disconnect themselves before the death of their host, lest they suffer the psychic backlash, and that nearly lethal pain could temporarily fend off their psychic compulsion. Seizing a lapse in the Dinyari's control near a communications tower, Kazersa suddenly injected itself with an acidic poison. In its final moments before death, it transmitted its knowledge across the galaxy. Before the Dinyari could react, Urquan everywhere began mutilating themselves, chopping off limbs and burning their flesh, anything to gain a precious few seconds to kill the nearest Dinyari. They created the Excruciator, a device that drilled directly into the brain to create an endless stream of agony. They wore them for years, until every last Dinyari was slaughtered, and the Urquan slave revolt was won. Then they, well...
We decided that we would never again be slaves. We would follow the path of now and forever.
After millennia of torture and slavery, the Urquan Kazersa, now named after the martyr of the revolt, decided that the only way to be safe was to subjugate every intelligent race. They called their doctrine the path of now and forever. The Korah were simpler. They decided that they would only be safe when everyone but the Urquan were dead. Thus, after the revolt began a civil war, the very first doctrinal conflict. The Kazersa were victorious thanks to the discovery of a powerful Precursor battleship, but in such a victory it left them hesitant. They spared their brethren and told them to fly around the galaxy in one direction while they would choose the other. When they met again, they would once again battle for the supremacy of their doctrine, and that's where we find ourselves today. All of this forces you to change how you think, and question the morality of things. What was easy to see as a simple subjugating hierarchy is now much more complicated, and not only that, but they're fighting against your destruction. Should the Urquan lose, the Korra will begin their death march, methodically exterminating every alien in that part of the galaxy as their circles of influence disappear one by one. You can even speak to the Urquan while it's happening.
Run, human.
What was once the singular point of your revolt is now sympathetic and regretful. When you leave, they'll even tell you,
Well, human, I hope your species survives.
By the way, the Urquan were inspired by a species of predatory caterpillar. I don't know the exact image, but this might be close. It makes it difficult to truly hate the Urquan, even when it's their own counterpart they spared that's responsible. And if not for the Korra's presence, they probably would have been more than happy to continue their oppression. But it's this complex network of motivations and morals that makes this thick, sticky web of intrigue. The intersection of alien cultures and values is such a fertile bed for this kind of deep introspection that you can't help but feel sucked in. When people remember Star Control 2 fondly, they're usually thinking of the weight of its setting. But this is the problem. If you don't find some way to stop the Korra, it'll be a whole lot worse than being trapped behind a shield. Unfortunately, you have no idea how to do that, but it's probably going to take some snooping around. You'll encounter other races, such as the Umga.
Well, hi there, human. How fluid sets today?
These disgusting blobs are another one of the Urquan's battle thralls, and they're quite the pranksters. In fact, they're the ones who swapped the rods for the Spathi, and played a hilarious prank on the Ilroth by pretending to be their gods Dogar and Kazon. Unlike the Spathi, you're not going to get away with a little excuse me, and their ships are a terrifying combination of hilariously weak and annoyingly strong, because sometimes the computer is terrifyingly good with their special reverse warping ability. The game is all about taking these interactions and fitting things together. You can chat before they attack you, and they'll tell you that the Arilu recently brought them one of the Urquan's talking pets to heal. It was badly injured, but being experts in biology, they couldn't help but repair it, as well as make a few modifications along the way. They'll also tell you that the wreck was around the star Alpha Pavonis. The game isn't going to remember this for you, so you'd better be writing these things down. Also, the game isn't going to tell you where Alpha Pavonis is unless you're directly over the single pixel it occupies, but that shouldn't be a problem, seeing as you definitely have the star map that came with all 4 floppy disks. This map has all the constellations, and is a quick reference when you want to know where to go. Without it, well, maybe this was their punishment for people who copied that floppy back in 1992. There is also the Pekunks, the rather interesting and whimsical avians.
We are the Pekunks.
They're the ones the Umga sent the Ilroth after for a laugh, and the ever-optimistic Pekunks take it in stride, and trying to see the goodness in everyone, their explanation for the Ilroth is that they simply must have been so good that at some point they wrapped around to pure evil. Their voice acting is incredible.
An interesting question. The answer would be yes.
As one of the few species not yet subjugated by the Urquan, they're quite friendly. And while they won't exactly ally with you, they will give you a random stick which they claim is from the Precursors, as well as a few of their ships. The Fury is the fastest ship in the game, and while it has low health, low range, and low damage, it makes up for all of that by being hilarious. To recharge energy, they need to repeatedly insult the enemy. Apparently Fred Ford did the voice on one day when he was particularly annoyed at Paul. Better yet, when it blows up, it has a 50% chance to just come back to life through mysterious cosmic powers. The voice acting wasn't actually original with the game. That was added in the 1994 3DO release. After Star Control 2, Toys for Bob made The Horde, a 1994 city-building hack-and-slash game. They were contracted to port it to the Sega CD, and after convincing a few people to quit their jobs and join the project, they were left out to dry when it became obvious that the Sega CD was dead in the water and the contract was cancelled. And so, not wanting to kick all those people out the door just as they came in, they decided on a whim to make a port of Star Control 2. This was around the time that CD-based technology was taking over, and compared to the floppies that originally came on, they suddenly found themselves with a glut of memory space, and so adding in full voice acting seemed like the most natural thing to do. Some argued that it didn't really need it, and that the fonts were enough to differentiate races. The inspiration to use specialized fonts for them was actually from the American comic series Pogo Possum. The voices sometimes differed from what people had imagined in their head, but while not strictly necessary, they were done well and added to the experience. This port also resulted in the rather dismal situation where Toys for Bob was forced to license their own game from Accolade to do it, but it was received well overall. Anyway, when you get a special item, you can bring it back to Commander Hayes to have his team examine it. Picking out what to do with the hints you'll gather from all these meetings is its own special kind of engagement. There's a level of interest and deduction that rivals many adventure games, and is presented quite naturally, though you do occasionally run out of hints, and when that time comes, your best bet is to usually fly somewhere you haven't been yet. You might run into the Oars, weird underwater birdfish who are utterly inscrutable.
Come to your house so that we can be relatives?
They might seem funny at first, but they're where the androsynth were supposed to be, and if you ask them about it, they get a little frumple.
It is dancing!
They're actually the fingers of some cosmic horror pressing into our universe after an experiment in dimensional fatigue by the androsynth alerted it to our presence. This entity is known only as them.
So much.
And you'll drive one of your crew members to madness trying to research the androsynth ruins. But as long as you don't ask too many questions, the Oars will join you, which makes me frumple, but a few extra ships won't hurt.
So much problems. No more androsynth is better.
There's also the Vux, which according to the Oars are silly cows, not like us happy campers. The Vux hate humanity unequivocally.
Can't you see you are making me sick?
And as another battle thrall, any encounter with them is going to end in combat. They're still hung up over that insult from the start of the first conflict. And despite their eloquence, there's not much to be gained from talking to them. However, if you want to apologize for Captain Rand's insult, you're free to do so. They won't take it, of course, but then you can try again, and again,
I don't think your heart is in it.
and again.
Didn't really mean it.
I've actually lost count.
Bother trying again.
Considering each of these results in combat that you're either going to need to win or warp out from, it took me about 15 minutes of straight apologizing to finally get them to admit the truth. They don't actually care about the insult. It was just a convenient excuse, because the truth is...
Human! You are so ugly, so hideous to us that we will never be able to find peace with your species.
It's honestly funny, and most players these days would expect to get something out of this much effort, but nope, they just hate you. And I respect the determination to have an alien race that just hates you for no reason and will never compromise. The good news is, if you've annoyed them enough, they'll actually tell you about a renegade Vux who actually likes humans. Admiral Zex manages an enormous menagerie on his own private moon in the Alpha Serenkov system. On the books, he was given this idyllic retreat as thanks for his tactical acumen in the first Urquan conflict, but in reality they exiled him because he's an enormous pervert. What an absolute legend. I know he looks exactly like any other Vux, but that's just the limitations of a game released in 1992. No matter how many times you annihilate an alien in combat, the next ship you encounter will act like they're meeting you again. So if it helps, just imagine that it's the same representative that you keep contacting every time. Talking with Zex isn't actually necessary to complete the main objective, but he does have in his possession a few cryogenically frozen Shofixti females, because of course he does. The Shofixti were thought to be made extinct after the events of the first game and they blew up their own star, but you can make a deal to get them. Zex wants a special beast that's far away on Delta Linsis 1, and your hint is supposed to be the long, thin creature who has swallowed the huge beast, but to this day I have no idea how that's supposed to point you to this constellation. After you grab it, your reward is that he tries to add you to his menagerie, only for the beast to eat him in the end and let you grab the maidens. If you've been paying the Melnorme for information, you might learn about a solitary survivor of the Shofixti race, after the rest of them took out a whole fleet of dreadnoughts by making their sun go supernova. Giving the race notorious for gloriously blowing themselves up in battle, Japanese names and accents would be a difficult sell today. Regardless, his sensors are malfunctioning, and as the ever-eager creature, he'll try to kill you. The Urquan scum. The Urquan are notoriously formal, if heavy-handed in their negotiations, and so it's only after you start insulting him repeatedly that he realizes that you're not the Urquan.
Urquan never insulted me before. Who did you say you are?
After that, you're free to give him the females.
Gently wake them, and then perform ribald feats of unsurpassed fertility. With their consent, of course.
The result of all this is that thanks to the Shofixi's unrivaled fecundity, in months' time you'll have an unlimited amount of crew available at the space station, so no more worrying. You'll also get their scout ships, but they kinda suck. Moving on in your grand galactic quest, you might encounter the Druge, or more aptly, the Crimson Corporation, because they're really one and the same.
I am an officer of the Crimson Corporation.
The Druge are all owned and operated under one massive corporation, and employment is mandatory, but business is always booming. When you first encounter them, they'll direct you to their homeworld, and there you can buy a handful of artifacts, ships, and fuel. Not for money, no. All of these are freely available as long as you make your crew available for employment. It's not slavery, no, the Crimson Corporation is simply looking for capable hands. And it's rare they need to downsize. Unfortunately, as the Crimson Corporation owns everything, anyone who's let go is immediately arrested for the theft of the air as well as trespassing. The punishment is incineration, and for a brief moment provide many BTUs to their ships. It's perhaps a little on the nose to make them pigs, though they're friendly apart from all of that, and actually quite useful. If you want to skip all the boring resource gathering on the planets at the start, you can outfit your entire ship with nothing but fuel tanks, trade them for an item for a full tank of fuel, then fly home, laughing as you sell the fuel for more RUs than you can make strip mining their entire sphere of influence. Of the 3 treasures they offer, the only thing you actually need is the Rosy Sphere, which you can get for 100 crew or trade for a key item. They also give you some very useful information. When the Korra were first heading for this quadrant, the Bruvixties warned them that their hyperwave communications were being tracked and the Korra were coming right for them. The Druze thanked them for the heads up by placing a powerful hyperwave caster on their moon which drew the Korra to them instead. It goes without saying that the Bruvixties aren't in this game, but you can collect the hyperwave caster and set it aside, just in case. All of this flying around takes a lot of time as well as fuel. Flying from one side of the map to the other takes months, and that's time you can't afford to lose. The Death March mechanic is divisive, because it does apply persistent pressure to what you're doing, and it does confront you with some very real stakes. In a vacuum, it's a great motivator, but it clashes with the core gameplay somewhat, which is all about discovery and exploration. Unless you've got meta-knowledge, a lot of your time will be spent just gathering enough RU to upgrade your vessel and buy the fuel necessary to go on the long journeys across hyperspace. Without guides, there's no doubt in my mind that someone playing for the first time will run out of time, and hopefully they kept an early save because otherwise you're going to be gathering all the upgrades again. In these sort of narratively driven games, retreading old content is rarely fun. When this was your only game in 1992 and cost $120 adjusted for inflation, you probably would have been more determined to stick with it, but these days when you see the Death March approaching, your response is probably going to be to open up a guide and reload an old save. Even if you're determined to play completely blind, when all the important stuff is simply information, it's easy to adopt a degenerate playstyle of exploring and then reloading if it doesn't turn up anything. That being said, you will definitely remember the first time the Death March happens. Because of how long it takes to travel anywhere, unless you know exactly what you're doing, it's unlikely you'll win without learning about quasi-space. It's so important that the developers are kind enough to include instructions in the guidebook on how to get it. Remember that broken Urquan ship? Well, if you visit Alpha Pavonis and retrieve it, you can head to Arilu space. Their sphere of influence is so small it's unlikely you'd encounter them naturally unless you purchased information from the Melnorme. If you wait here until the 17th of any month, a portal will appear and suck you into quasi-space. It's much more condensed than hyperspace, and all the way in the distance is Fala Yala Rolfari.
Ha-ha! Our clever ward has found our nook in time.
The Arilu are strange, interdimensional beings, and they might resemble some rather stereotypical aliens, and that's because they've been interfacing with humanity for millennia. Their motives are obscure and they're difficult to trust, mostly speaking with adoring condescension. The more you speak with them, the less you want to trust them. The Ors dislike them for always jumping in front, and whether that's a good thing is anyone's guess, but they claim to be protecting you from things beyond. Likely the same things that the Androsynth invited with their research. They reveal they were only in the Alliance to protect humanity, and as soon as you were slave-shielded, decided they no longer needed to worry. Not only that, they explain that they were the ones who found the Urquan wreck, the wreck that had strangely failed to self-destruct. They speak of how they found one of the talking pets that the Urquan use on the verge of death. They weren't skilled enough at healing things from real space, and so they gave it to the Umga instead, hoping that they could save the poor creature. There's something unnerving about them, but they exceed that these are dangerous circumstances with the Korra involved, and they permit you to use one of their portal spawners despite the apparent risks, as long as you bring them the warp pod from that wreck.
We are so proud of you.
With the portal spawner, you can enter quasi-space from anywhere for the relatively low cost of 10 fuel. Each one of these portals brings you to somewhere different on the map, and once you know where to go, you can traverse the whole thing in moments. You might just find yourself on the opposite corner speaking with a race of sentient plants.
Hello, Voyager. May the light always reach your leaves.
The Supocs are minor but important allies as far as plants go. They're mostly minding their own business. There's not much that concerns them except for their neighbors and friends, the Utwig. Several years ago, the Druge sold the Utwig a strange device called the Ultron, claiming that it would give them incredible powers. This was an absolute load. The Druj will admit as much if you ask them, but the Utwig believed them instantly and eagerly paid the Druj a planet's ransom, anything to get their hands on the Ultron. It made them so happy for a while, until they accidentally broke it. The entire race has been in mourning since.
Now the Utwig are morose and depressed.
They gave their beloved Ultron to the Supox because they couldn't even stand to look at it anymore. The Supox tried to fix it, but despite being apparently useless, it was an actual Precursor artifact. They give it to you and just hope that you can do something with it. After hearing all that, there's no reason not to go check in on their neighbors, and they're... yeah.
I suppose, as a courtesy, I should extend an appropriate greeting.
I'm gonna be honest, these guys are my favorite aliens in the whole game.
I truly hope, for your sake, that your day has been better than ours.
I've heard some people complain about their voice, and I have got to disagree. It's perfect. As the Supox said, they're a little depressed, and despite their assurances that the Utwig used to be much more lively, it's kind of hard to believe. The Utwig are known for one major thing, and that's their super bomb. At some point in the past, they found a powerful Precursor artifact capable of leveling an entire planet, perhaps even solar system, and they just kept it around because fate says it might be useful one day, or on the off chance that the entire race chose voluntary self-annihilation. The loss of their Ultron has brought them closer than ever. It's clear there is only one thing that could get them out of their funk, and that's fixing the Ultron.
Alright, I'll try.
Paul Ricci's first foray into interactive narratives was in his 1983 game Murder on the Zinderneuf, a murder mystery on a Zeppelin. This was back when memory was so limited you had to ration the number of letters you were using, and so dialogue was done mostly through posturing like aggressive or inquisitive in order to get information out of people. This system was iterated upon by the 1983 release Starflight, an early sandbox game about trading, fighting, and diplomacy by Greg Johnson. Yes, the same person that introduced Fred and Paul. It wasn't exactly by Paul, but he simply couldn't help himself from helping out even while he was supposed to be working on mail-order monsters. It was a combination of all of these that eventually became Star Control II. As for the game itself, it shares a lot of its adventurous DNA with early role-playing games and tabletops, and that's no coincidence either. In 1976, during high school, Paul encountered an odd student who would always study these strange pamphlets before class. He asked what they were, and soon enough he was in the basement playing Dungeons & Dragons. This is also where he met Errol Otis, one of the illustrators for the art of Star Control II. Errol was hired by TSR, who was the publisher of D&D at the time, and it was through this connection that Paul was inspired to apply there himself. He was accepted and eventually found himself crafting some of the earliest modules for the role-playing game. And this isn't strictly relevant to this video, but while I was doing research, I learned that Paul Ricci was actually responsible for creating the Thri-Kreen race, which blew my mind. Anyway, these are the Threadash. They're your stereotypical rough-and-tumble warrior race, but the subversive part is they are absolute idiots.
How wonderful. Someone new to fight.
They're not idiots, but also good at fighting. They're actually just idiots, because constantly killing each other makes it difficult to develop actual effectiveness. Their ships are terrible, they're stupid, and you can blow them up pretty easily with your Precursor vessel. They extol the virtues of learning from your opponents, and that by being creamed they can only become stronger, but they're idiots. They're on Culture 19 right now, and that's because since they started counting, Cultures 1 through 18 were all wiped out by the next culture. They've actually discovered spaceflight multiple times, only to eventually blow themselves back to the Stone Age. Culture 14 questioned whether these endless cycles of violence and brutality were actually detrimental for the Threadash, but these womanish notions were proven incorrect by Culture 15. You can trick them into fighting the Korra, but they are so terrible they don't even make a difference. You can blow them up so many times that they eventually acquiesce to your superior force and allow you to establish Culture 20, but these guys aren't important. What is important is the artifact they possess on one of their planets. If you take it before becoming allied with them, they'll never side with you, but that's no small loss. Regardless, with the Aqua Helix from the Threadash, the Clear Spindle from the Pekunk, and the Rosy Sphere from the Druj, you can combine them to repair the Ultron. The Utwig are utterly beside themselves.
Yes! It is! A miracle! Oh, happy day! Joyous occasion!
Their culture places a great deal on masks, and replaying this I was like, reminds me of the Moon Moth. Imagine my satisfaction when I watched an interview and said that that was their exact inspiration. Well, with the Ultron returned, the Utwig listened to it.
We have been directed to join with our Supox allies and attack you! No wait, that's wrong. Sorry!
It tells them to attack the Korra, and with their help it'll delay the Death March by a whole year. It's no wonder, because now that you're allied with them, you can build their ships, the Jugger, and man are they overpowered. Even your fully upgraded Vindicator with homing shots will struggle to take out a Korra ship unscathed, but the Jugger just does what it wants. It's slow and doesn't regenerate energy, but that doesn't matter when it can shield itself and convert any damage into energy. Also, it's allowed to fire without expending any energy at all, so with some decent reaction speed, you can take out as many Marauders and Dreadnoughts as you want. Frankly, it's incredible that they couldn't just win the war all on their own. Also, with their allegiance, they allow you to take their super bomb for yourself, since the Ultron tells them you have a need for it. When you head for the planet they keep it on, who's there but the Druge?
You here, Captain.
They've wanted the bomb since the beginning, and only sold the Ultron to the Utwig because they thought they'd be able to trade it for the bomb. They didn't expect the Utwig to become immediately enamored with it, and they doubly didn't expect the High Proctor to suddenly listen to the Ultron and, on its instruction, pay the Druge with useless junk instead of the bomb. They say it's rightfully theirs, and therein lies the disagreement.
Die, child, die!
This is one of the only truly unavoidable combat encounters in the game. The Druge Mauler is actually quite formidable with its speed and range. They're even a match for the range of the Earthling's homing nukes. I've got to say, humans having an obsession with nuclear warheads even in space is probably one of my favorite sci-fi tropes ever. Anyway, after you dispatch them, you're free to take the Utwig bomb. You can just use it at any time to instantly end your game, so don't do that. You might see these aliens and wonder where the rest of the old allies are. Well, it should be no surprise that they're behind a slave shield as well. The Chenjesu, the old leaders of the Alliance, are all locked away on their homeworld. Though if you've been shooting enough innocent wildlife to pay the Melnorme for information, they'll tip you off that the Chenjesu are scheming something. The only way to communicate through the slave shield would be to use an immensely powerful hyperwave device. But guess what we picked up off of some moon?
We are the Chenjesu. We are the Mernherm.
The crystalline Chenjesu are currently in the process of merging their race with the mechanical Mernherm. The result, they believe, could rival the Urquan, but it's a slow process. They're reliant on the radiant energy of their own sun as it passes through the slave shield. They say it'll take another 35 years. And unfortunately, the Korra aren't going to wait that long. They will tell you something that you should know, because the Urquan have a secret weapon. When it looked like the Alliance could win, the Urquan revealed it, a powerful Precursor battleship they call the Sumatra, which will be awarded to the winner of the doctrinal conflict. Simply destroying their fleet wouldn't even be enough to win the war. You need to destroy the Sumatra, and only an unimaginably large weapon could do it. With no way to help them right now, you're forced to leave. And at this point you might start exploring around some more. You might even pay the Umga another visit, only this time... they seem a little different. They're not nearly as jovial and sanguine as they ought to be. They're also not very open to questions right now. Luckily, I've learned where their homeworld is, so it's time for a little welfare check.
What do you want?
What's this thing? You might recognize it as one of the Urquan's talking pets, except it's talking on its own. When the Umga were operating on it, they found evidence of a highly advanced neural pathway in their genes, and simply reactivated those. The result is an intelligent talking pet, but something's not quite right. You see, this is a Dinyari, and it only took one to control the entire Umga race.
Oh, you know about that, do you? Oh well, I guess that means I'll have to kill you now.
If you figure this out, he'll compel you to seek death at the hands of the Urquan.
Go get yourself killed. In addition, your refusal to answer our transmissions is taken as an insult.
Fortunately, the Urquan's propensity for grandiosity works in your favor, and you snap out of it. They'll mostly admonish you while you whine about your aching head, but this is what happens if you so much as hint at what happened.
What did you say? Compulsion? What happened? Explain.
To put it academically, this compels a deep affective response in me. To put it laconically, it's written well. Since the beginning, the Urquan are established as these awesome and overwhelming creatures, and seeing them recoil at the merest mention of the Dinyari really sells the depth of the situation. There's so much of this game that just sticks with you, and trying to show them all in the short format of this video simply doesn't do it justice.
So tell me what I want to know, human. Now.
It's so good it actually hurts to need to cut out so much from this conversation.
What? Oh No, it cannot be.
The Urquan are genuinely some of the most compelling villains I've ever encountered in all of media.
What do you mean? Elucidate.
They blur the line between enemy and ally, oppressor and victim perfectly. And if there was one singular thing that tied Star Control together, it would be the Urquan.
Now leave, and never return.
Though that's what happens if you're unprepared. Luckily for us, we followed through on some information and found the mind shield that the Ta'elo created before the Urquan destroyed them. When the Dinyari can't compel you, he sends the God after you, and as soon as you dispatch them, you're free to do as you please. The Dinyari claims he's had a change of heart and offers to help you. He wants revenge on the Urquan for turning his entire race into mindless pets, and claims that he could distract the Urquan for a moment should you ever need it. As loathsome as it is to carry the most evil thing ever spawned by the galaxy in your cargo hold, you can't deny the utility. By the way, the hail you as a hero.
Hooray! Inhuman Earthling!
And then decide to attack you because it would be really funny. If you encounter any Urquan with a Dinyari on board, they'll experience a little generational trauma. It's one thing to hear about the Urquan's past, but it's another thing to actually see the consequences of it, and it gives this great sense of reactivity to the story.
First time in generations. We fear.
There's one allied race left unaccounted for. It's the Cyrene. And, you know, with how obsessed sci-fi series are these days with subversion, it's a little nostalgic seeing a completely standard space babe out in the wild. They are in a similar situation as you, with a few of them being relegated to a single space station. They used to be nomads, but the Urquan found it difficult to put them behind a slave shield when they had no planet left, and so they simply found them a new one. Their old world was destroyed and reduced to sulfur and lava by a strange meteor impact, and if you bring proof that it was the Mycon who did it, they will join your cause. The Mycon are bizarre sentient fungi, and they somehow make even less sense than the Ors. But all you need to know is that their only purpose in life is to spread more of the Mycon and assimilate all of the Non. To do that, they shoot their deep children into a planet's core until the surface becomes the volcanic wasteland they love so much. There's a few egg cases on a handful of volcanic planets that you can gather as proof, but there's another device you need from the Mycon, and they're not giving it to you. Once you prove it to the Cyrene, they'll lament that they can't exact revenge, but if you can find where the Urquan stashed all their starships, you can unlock it and send them on their way. Their ships are called penetrators, by the way, because of course they are. By the way, you can get gratuitously implied sex if you flirt with her enough, but if you want to see that, you'll have to play the game for yourself. Anyway, you distract the Mycon by telling them of a world that's ripe for infection, and then send the Cyrene after them. While they're distracted with that, it gives you enough time to go down to one of their planets and retrieve the Sun device now that most of their guards are gone. The Sun device is capable of letting out an intense amount of solar energy, and the Mycon enjoyed using it to grow their children, but we've got a better use in mind. Unfortunately, when you go to the Chenjesu's homeworld again, it seems that the Ilrath have had other things in mind. When planets are surrounded like this, no matter how many you kill, you will never get through.
Your visit to this world with great interest.
If you've been paying attention to the antics of the and the exasperation of the Spathi, you might have an idea of what to do next. Considering the only reason the Ilrath are even in the area is because of a prank, it seems logical that maybe another one could get rid of them.
The voices of our gods Dogar and Kazan.
I actually never realized that you could use the Bruvixi caster for it. I always thought that you needed the caster. By the way, I haven't given the Spathi enough credit. They're easily my second favorite aliens behind the tie between the Urquan and the Utwig. Their cowardly pragmatism is both amusing and commendable.
Don't presume we are stupid.
If you search Pluto, which was still a planet when this game was made, you'll find Captain Fwifo. And if you want the whole story, you'll have to play the game yourself, but he'll give you the secret cipher that allows you to talk to the Spathi High Council. They're the only ones with an alternate graphic, and it makes me think that there may have been others had they not been so behind schedule. To make a long story short, they'll pretend to ally with you, but after studying Earth for a few months, you'll find that they've intentionally slave-shielded themselves after reverse engineering the technology. Left behind is the caster the used to troll the Ilrath. Well, with either one in hand, all you need to do is fly to the Ilrath homeworld and pretend to be Dogar and Kazan. You can mess with them, like telling them to always say dwee instead of we.
We certainly will.
But once you've had your fun, you can send them off to find better prey. They'll immediately settle on the Thread Ash, and it's awkward since they're technically my allies at this moment, but those guys are idiots, they probably deserve it.
Kill all of them.
Anyway, now you can return to the Chenjesu, and with the Sun device in hand, you can accelerate their merging process a millionfold.
We are free.
With the process complete, the Chenjesu and the Mernherm become the Chimur.
We are the Chimur.
Now that the original founders of the Alliance are free and stronger than ever, it seems like things are looking up, but as long as the Urquan have the Sumatra, they will never win. Fortunately, with their new powers, they're able to supercharge the Utwig bomb. It requires gutting half your vessel though, and there's no more emergency warp, so any fights you encounter you need to win. But to make up for that, you have unlimited RU, and I recommend spending that on Juggers. The actual location of the Sumatra is obscured, and it's only by taking together all the hints you've gotten throughout the entire game that you'll try to piece together its location, but it's pretty obvious when you find it. So, Star Control 2. It's held up remarkably well compared to the first installment in the series. The story it tells and the characters it presents are timeless. I can confidently recommend someone play it even today. The game is simple and straightforward, and the tutorial is comprehensive. You can play it with only 2 buttons and the direction keys. In an age of games that required 50-page manuals and a PhD to play, it stands out as a shining beacon of what a narratively driven game can be and has influenced several games since, such as the Fallout series, Mass Effect, and Stellaris to name a few. It's not without its flaws. Towards the end, it becomes something of a fetch quest where you're flying from key location to key location, and the unique planets are almost completely forgotten the moment you've got enough RU to fund your thirst for fuel and warm bodies. The thousands of planets are mostly backdrops, and though they're unique and can be landed on, fundamentally their purpose is to become the hay when you're looking for a needle. That's fine, but it does raise the issue of procedural generation's struggle with interest. It's something that Fred and Paul were aware of, a full 20 years before No Man's Sky had to relearn this lesson, and that's why they focused on sprinkling around points of interest that you need to find through dialogue rather than trying to make every planet uniquely interesting. The battles are engaging, and a welcome respite from the chatter, but funnily enough, I actually found them more interesting in Star Control 1. In that game, the varied ship design had real utility and strategy in picking the best for the situation. But in Star Control 2, they're mostly interchangeable insofar as the upgraded Vindicator is better than all of them until you get the Jugger, and then the Jugger is better than all of them. Even with favorable matchups, combat isn't really something you preempt, and so you don't really fight any aliens enough apart from the Urquan to need to rely on particular matchups. Of course, this is still a thing in the Super Melee mode, which some people still enjoy, but getting someone into my house to play Star Control 2 Super Melee is a little tough these days. I'll save some of my finer points for later, but suffice to say, it's not for no reason that Star Control 2 is remembered fondly to this day. But with the help of a Dinyari, you're able to lure enough of the Urquan away from the Sumatra to engage it directly. Oh yeah, these guys are the yay hot, and as much as I love the Scottish space pterodactyls, there is never a great time to introduce them since they're not strictly necessary to win the game. But they're what the Pekunk looked like before they got weird, and they're kind enough to show up and help us after we started a civil war.
No, Captain, together we can attack the Sumatra!
It's a good thing too, because the Pekunk Furies they brought with them are the best ship for taking on the Sumatra. It's got several homing fireballs that absolutely annihilate ships, as well as these annoying green blobs that bounce you around incessantly. Only the Fury is fast enough to outrun all of them, and so by making circles around it you can take down all the force field points. Juggers are the only other ship that are really capable of doing this, so make sure you're prepared. Also, don't bring in the Vindicator until you've taken out the homing fireballs. I had to remember that the hard way. Well, after that, you can pilot your vessel into the Sumatra and activate the Utwig's explosive. You wake up with Talana of the Cyrene watching over you, having only narrowly escaped in your pod outside the range of the explosives. Thanks to your efforts, the Alliance was able to rout the Urquan in your absence, and the Chimur were able to lower the slave shield around Earth. It's revealed that you're decidedly male and actually married Talana, which is a little awkward if you've never actually flirted with her. But this is the 90s, who wouldn't? Girls? Ew! Incidentally, the developer said they actually wanted to make the captain androgynous and never actually show him directly, but when Accolade was ordering some early promotional material, they took it upon themselves to make him male and kind of forced their hand. The ending finally teases a sequel, as well as an elderly captain. That is an entirely different story indeed. Star Control 2 was received with praise and sold reasonably well, earning a few awards for Adventure Game of the Year in 1993, but as it is with many notable games, it gained much of its prominence with the benefit of hindsight. Some of its performance could be blamed on the absolute dominion that Origin's Wing Commander series held over PC space sims at the time, but with the 3DO release, it enjoyed its time in the sun, and it was enough to warrant a third installment in the series. However, as far as most fans are concerned, Star Control 2 is the last game in the Star Control series. After the success of Star Control 2, Accolade was interested in a sequel. Toys for Bob pitched an expansion instead, but Accolade declined. Fred and Paul were interested, but they wanted to cool off with a fantasy game first, which Accolade also declined, offering them the same budget as they had before for Star Control 2, the same deal that saw Fred footing the bill by the end. As the company that chose the name Accolade purely so that they could appear above Activision in the phone book, it's no wonder that they gave some pretty hardball offers. Oh, and for all the Zoomers watching, phone books were these giant yellow tomes that doxed everyone. We have the benefit of hindsight, but at the time, Star Control 2 hadn't actually outperformed Star Control 1 in terms of sales, even though they were leagues apart in terms of quality and content. Perhaps it's no wonder that after this, Toys for Bob chose to publish the Horde with Crystal Dynamics instead. 2 years went by without much news on the Star Control front, but perhaps it was the success of the 3DO release in 1994 that inspired Accolade to make their move. It was around then that they licensed the rights for the Star Control universe from Toys for Bob and contracted a company called Legend Entertainment to make Star Control 3. It released in September of 1996 and promised to take place directly after the events of Star Control 2, but without the original writers or developers, it would be a very rocky development. Star Control 3 starts after the destruction of the Sumatra, and, well, you listen to it.
But the massive energies unleashed in the cataclysmic maelstrom ripped a hole in time and pulled your escape pod into the near future. You witnessed a great battle at the galactic core. A vast armada of the galaxy's great sentient races stood poised against an unknown enemy as reality itself hovered on the brink of interdimensional collapse. You lost consciousness as you watched the sentient races die, screaming, their life energies sucked into the void. Your escape pod then hurtled back through time and space to your home quadrant.
So basically, while the Sumatra was exploding, it tore open a portal in time and flung you into the future, where you saw everyone mysteriously die, then you got flung back in time, then reality started collapsing, so it broke your hyperspace transportation, but you built another Precursor vessel after blowing up the first one that can use bubble warp technology instead. Then you took all your allies and warped towards the galactic tour, because that would help, apparently. Then the game starts, and it's just spinning out of control. I didn't do anything, it just starts like this. I don't know if it's because it wasn't programmed for the clock rates of modern computers, that can happen sometimes, but I've got to hit F2 and read the tutorial. Already I'm just overwhelmed with information, but apparently you need to click this to make it stop spinning. The art of the tutorial had yet to be perfected in 1996. It's controlled primarily by mouse this time, and eventually I figure out how to click on a star, then click on this planet around that star to slowly start flying towards it.
Hiya, Captain. Boy, are we glad to see you. Any problems getting here?
It brings up a conversation screen, as you'd expect, and already the music here is unremarkable. It's not the Earthlings if they aren't throwing a 24/7 space rave. He mostly just reiterates everything you did in the last game and what the intro said, so then you leave and this thing flies at you speaking nonsense.
5576 squared. Lack 888 warning.
Unfortunately, it never taught me how to shoot at things, and it's different from 1 and 2, so it kills me. The dentist drill attack is the loudest thing ever, and it explodes even louder. With some peace and quiet, it's back to being confused. There's all these buttons on the side that open up different menus, then there's all these numbers up here, but it's unclear what to actually do. Fortunately, you can hit F2 on any screen, and it'll give you a detailed tutorial on what you're looking at. It's verbose and overly complicated, but I have definitely seen worse. It's not nearly as approachable as Star Control 2, but complexity in of itself isn't terrible. Once you get it to stop spinning, the star map looks a lot like it did in Star Control 1, but in 1996 it wouldn't have been nearly as impressive. This is the same year that Mario 64 came out. At least in the first game it contained some tactical relevance, but here it's just 3D for the sake of being 3D. It wouldn't be so bad if you could pan it by holding down right-click and dragging, but the only way to change the view is to click the button, let it spin, then hope the new perspective is more scrutable than the last. The Earthlings told me to go visit the Cyrene colony, even though I don't really understand what we're supposed to be doing here yet. And good lord, what happened to the Cyrene? If this happened today, there'd be a whole culture war on Twitter over it. As you can see, most of the models are done with live puppets and animatronics. With the benefit of hindsight, it might seem ridiculous to switch from finely crafted pixel graphics to this, but back then they didn't really think of them as pixel graphics, they were just graphics. With the immense storage space that compact discs offered, Star Control 3 was developed in the middle of the FMV craze of the early 90s, and with the rush of innovation in that decade, there was a very real fear of being left behind. It's impressive that they did all this using live sets and models, but compared to Star Control 2, it just looks dated. At the beginning, you're mostly trying to find the colonies of all your allies after you got separated in the warp towards the galactic core, or something. It's a little strange, but you need fuel to jump. You can pick up fuel whenever you visit a colony, so you're pretty limited at the start. There are some strange design decisions. It's not as if they didn't have the rights, so why are the spathy pink? I can understand adjusting the designs for something that had to exist in 3 dimensions, but why pink? Maybe they ran out of green dye or something. Also, the voice actors in the 3DO release were mostly Paul, Fred, and their friends, so they're different now. And I'm sorry, but I just don't think a Bostonian accent is a good fit for them.
Our end is at hand. We surrender, oh merciful evil alien.
The game's main feature is this colony system, and after reading an entire thesis on star control theory, you can establish your first colony. You've got to pick a suitable planet, then go into the overview screen, mouse over all the different colors on the map, hope you have a suitable race for that environment, and then click. Choose how many people you want to send down, and then use a landing pod to establish it. After that, you can access this screen while in orbit. It sort of smacks of Master of Orion, but with 1/100th the actual complexity. The graphics are reminiscent of many top-down strategy games of the time, such as Warcraft, which were growing in popularity. Okay, I'm going to cut through the continuity a bit, but this whole system is outrageously complicated for something so fatuous. It took me real effort to fully understand all these mechanics, and my reward for understanding them is realizing that they're almost completely pointless. It almost feels like a joke, like solving a puzzle box only to open it and find a picture of a middle finger inside. This whole screen is basically the equivalent of all those buttons, knobs, and levers you'll see on children's toys. They don't do anything, but you can pretend they do. The only purpose of these colonies is to make fuel, that's it. Here's what you do when you make a colony. You max these levers, you turn these off, and then you can hopefully swing by a year later to collect fuel, once and be on your way. They chose to do it this way because the 2 biggest complaints they got from Star Control 2 were the resource gathering and the need to return to Earth to purchase more fuel. The colony system is actually an interesting way to evolve Star Control, since it would be putting the Star Control back in Star Control since the first Star Control. The problem is you've got all this window dressing for something that could have been a simple button from orbit. It feels like there must have been some kind of defense system planned, but if there was, it certainly got cut for time because your colonies are all perfectly safe. They can make starships, but that means diverting production from fuel, and you will be glutted for starships the entire game, so that's pointless too. You never need to make landing pods. You'll need like 10 at most, and towards the end of the game my landing pods glitched anyway and I had like 2 billion of them. The research is also pointless. In my fresh confusion starting this game, it mentioned that the research and artifacts were the key to winning, and you can find artifacts scattered across planets, so I'd assumed that making colonies to research would be a major component. But no, all of those artifacts are for insignificant things like increasing the Urquan Dreadnought's turning speed by 2.5%, which isn't even worth the fuel to fly there. Anyway, you'll really feel the fuel squeeze around at the beginning, as you have no idea where to find the colonies of your allies in this big spinning map. After the first few, you're just in the dark, so you need to start jumping around looking for them, and it's worth pointing out that I still don't know what I'm really supposed to be doing here. Warping around, there's this planet with some red numbers around it, and apparently it's an alien.
Desist all functioning! Identificate yourself imminently!
These are the first aliens not from the first game I've encountered, and they mostly just shout at me using malapropisms.
Undisputified masters of the hegemonic crux! Supreme, non-vincible tyrants over all quadrants of the galaxy!
It's kinda confusing what they're even doing here, because they claim that they're the Katang and part of the hegemonic crux, the masters of this quadrant of space. They're apparently your enemy, except they won't even bother attacking you. I want you to take a step back and consider what we know. Something is going to destroy all life in the galaxy, and reality itself is somehow deteriorating, and thus far the only hostile entities I've encountered were probes speaking gibberish. The second game had those, and it turns out the Sly Landro were actually really nice once you get to know them. Now, at complete random, I've stumbled upon these very stupid aliens claiming to be the masters of the galaxy. At first, I thought they were just exaggerating and that was part of their character, but no, the hegemonic crux apparently controls this sector of space. Looking around more, I find another colony with red ships, and checking out, it's just these things that look like dogs called the Doog, and they're even dumber than the Katang.
Please don't blastify us.
They're also supposed to be part of the Crux, and even though they seem to be some kind of oppressed alien, think back for another moment. Of the first 3 races I've encountered, I've had a gibberish-speaking drone, pugnacious but ineffectual morons, and then even bigger morons. Almost all on my own volition, mind you. Compare that to the intro of Star Control 2. You're told about the war, you realize you've lost, and within moments you're confronted with the Urquan. You see Earth behind the slave shield, and Commander Hayes assumes that you're an Urquan supply vessel at first. It's so dramatically dense that it leaves you with a dreadfully clear idea of what's really going on, and then it even challenges that understanding along the way. In this game, it's like, I'm supposed to be here to stop some kind of cataclysmic event, and yet I've got no idea what that's even supposed to mean. The only openly hostile entities are the Dak-Tak Lak-Pak, and they're only in groups of one defending useless artifacts. From a purely narrative standpoint, it just leaves you feeling aimless. Eventually, you'll encounter all of your allies, including the Urquan.
Greetings to the captain of the League of Sentient Races, from Zorak.
The intro to this game sure is pulling a lot of weight, just hand-waving the Urquan into your allies like that. Speaking objectively, I don't think 20,000 years of torture and slavery to the point of subjugating every race out of fear is something that you can just gloss over with, yeah, we're friends now, but it's difficult to continue someone else's creation. The lead developers of Star Control 3 were actually fans of Star Control. They allegedly assembled a Bible of all the original game's characters and lore and referred to that religiously. It's nice to see, especially in this age where people seem to be actively searching for people who hate the source material to do this stuff. There's also the Vux, which are amongst your allies as well, in spite of their revulsion.
Is our good friend the human there?
Knowing that Star Control 3 was written by different writers, it's impossible to avoid comparing the writing. Some would argue that it's impossible to truly continue anyone's work. When it comes to creative media, what isn't there is almost as important as what is, and this is something that anyone attempting to expand upon it is going to be missing. Any creative worth their salt will have about 10 ideas in their heads for every one they put to paper, and while those aren't present to the reader, it informs the creative process in ways that are unknowable to an outsider. Furthermore, those pieces are usually some part of the creator's soul, and so it comes much easier to them to affect whatever effect they're going for. Everyone's different in their own interesting ways, but if something was a success, presumably there was a piece of the author that resonated, and that's difficult to reproduce. Unless the person picking up the reins is similar in mind, or at least intimately familiar with the original creator, things can get lost in translation. The Spathy's pragmatic sarcasm has been worn down and simplified to simple, mewling cowardice. The Urquan's original domineering aspect is dysfunctional with this setting, and so they behave like domesticated dogs. This is perhaps something that the original creators could get away with, but this brings up the biggest issue: legitimacy. When trying to inhabit another's work, there is no room to stumble because anything that hits below the mark will be a searing brand of illegitimacy. The original work becomes almost sacred. I mean, the term Bible is not misplaced, but that puts a burden on any writer hoping to tackle it. The result is often a desperate clinging to the previous work. It's easier to think of answers to questions that the work posed before, and it's safer to tie up any threads that it left hanging, because these can be seen as carrying over some degree of legitimacy, but not every question was meant to be answered. You cannot craft a narrative only by clinging to old works, however, and so compelled by fear of that dreadful specter of illegitimacy, it becomes necessary to allow yourself as much freedom as possible. Star Control 3 didn't take place around Earth because it couldn't. There's too much baggage, it's too suffocating for the new writers. The solution? The fresh start, the clean slate, the new quadrant of the universe where there's only a few flanderized races left to tie the old to the new and leaves them with the freedom to torture old mystery into absolute certainty. It's unclear how much Fred and Paul were involved. It was either little or none at all, but when it released, this promotional splash of issue 24 of PC Gamer proudly displayed these quotes from the original creators. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouths, but from all the interviews I've watched, the topic of Star Control 3 is generally avoided. I don't think there's any animosity there, but the fact that they saw fit to develop their own sequel to Star Control 2 over 30 years later shows that it couldn't have been aligned with their vision. Well, I've hardly talked about the plot and I've already thrown out my thesis. Well, moving forward, it's important to keep in mind that this game was generally well received and was a modest commercial success, but amongst fans it is seen as decidedly non-canon. Well, here's roll call. The Pekunks are much more pterodactyl-like than toucan-like, the Mycon are these weird tulip things, and the Utwig are a little too sanguine.
How may the Utwig assist the glorious captain?
They're just not the same without the whiny voices, but at least their change in appearance can be explained as them wearing a different mask. The oars aren't underwater anymore, actually it may have been alcohol, I can't remember, and the Chimera are here too, but despite being the head of the old alliance, they're hardly relevant. The fourth member of the Crux are the Harika and the Yorn, and the Harika eat the Yorn, as demonstrated by these advanced animatronics. It's okay, the Yorn like it apparently, and once again, even though they're in the Crux, they don't attack you. Yes. I'm not going to go into as much depth as I did Star Control 2, but after finding most of the colonies, eventually one of the stars will implode.
Unnatural, interdimensional fatigue suddenly causes the Pica system to collapse. into nothingness, leaving behind a strange, dark anomaly.
I'm not really sure what triggers it, but this seems to kick off most everything else. For the first bit, you'll mostly be going back and forth between your colonies, and over time the humans will chime in with some of their recent research. This isn't tied to colonies or the research buildings, it just seems to kinda happen over time after key events. They'll start telling you about evidence of something called the Eternal Ones. It's important to note that the Rainbow Worlds in Star Control 2 were pointing towards the galactic core, and so the justification for heading to this part of the galaxy was that by following the Precursor's instructions, we might uncover some way to handle reality ripping itself apart. Others will start talking about the Eternal Ones, like the Cyrene and the Utwig, and finally you start seeing where the grand galactic threat that was teased at the start could be coming from. After asking around, you'll start to piece together that most of the members of the Crux were actually manipulated into it, and the mastermind of it all seems to be an alien race called the Ploxus, with assistance from the Dax. But what you can do with that information isn't immediately obvious. Out of frustration, I started repeatedly threatening the Doogs, and even though they didn't have any ships to engage combat with, the game seems to treat it like I've actually attacked them, and then ICOM, aka Not Hal, tells me I've been demoted from captain, but then nothing happens, so whatever. You can see how many stars I've already visited. At this point, all I'm able to do is continue blindly exploring even more stars, but I'm limited by fuel. I run into these creatures, the Viro Ingo, which are really just crabs that vacillate between combative and obsequious. They're not in the Crux as far as I can tell, they're just sort of there.
If it's any consolation, we attack the Crux all the time as well.
The least I can do when I waste my time visiting a star system is to set up a colony there, but it depends on the resource value whether it's even worth putting one on. And honestly, probably about 80% of the colonies I set up saw zero use by the end of the game, but it's something to do at least. In another star system, I'm attacked by these creatures with no neck.
Fight you to the death.
They're the only things aside from the Dak-Tak Lak-Pack to actually attack me at this point, so it's a bit of a shock. The combat in this game is, it shouldn't feel that much different, but it does. The isometric view makes it really awkward to aim, but honestly, most of it is probably just the sound design. There's just no getting around that the music in this game is vastly inferior. After defeating them in battle, you can just fly over to their colony over here, and they won't attack you either. They'll just intimate that they've been bound for some reason to serve the Crux, and won't say any more than that. Over here you'll have these Ewok-looking creatures, and they just attack you as well. I made the mistake of trying to use a penetrator to kill them, and it was literally impossible to the point that I just accepted death by crashing into the planet. I am 99% certain that there is no way to warp out of combat to save a ship like there was in Star Control 2, so you just need to explode. Thankfully, the Urquan Dreadnought can just shoot straight through their weird shield things. Anyway, once again you talk to them and you get even more inscrutable dialogue. They talk about trials and emptiness of the mind, but it's starting to become a little tiring that everyone I'm talking to is either an idiot or speaking absolute nonsense. There's not much to be learned from these people either, and then Hal tells me that the League has officially declared war on the Crux, which probably should have happened in the intro. And it doesn't really change anything either, because I'm still just kind of flying around. Most events seem to be time-gated off of some sort of trigger that I'm not sure I fully understand, but you'll be flying around and then randomly get contacted by the humans with more research, or Hal will tell you something about something that happened. The researchers will randomly tell you that the Mycon Deep Children are actually sentient and being oppressed, which is against the Council's laws or something, which then causes them to become enemies when you push it.
Leave the League.
Then the Spathi just abruptly leave the Alliance to join the Crux because they were threatened into it, and that would have felt more normal if the Crux had shown any degree of competence or any indication that they were even capable of exerting that kind of force. These factions are now enemies, which means I can't take fuel from their colonies anymore. But even further, if you made any colonies on other worlds using the Spathi or the Mycon, those colonies are now enemies as well. In fact, the only races that don't have any issues throughout the whole game are humans, Cyrene, Pekunk, and Utwig. That would be a bit rude if the colonies were actually that useful in the first place. What's funny is that they're supposed to make enemy ships as well, but because I always turned off the colony's starbase to make more fuel, it was impossible for them. Then the Arilu show up out of nowhere and start talking to you. Once again, I was confused as to why the Arilu weren't green just like the Spathi and the Vux are, and then it hit me. They were using live animatronics, so they probably needed a green screen. I researched it, and as it turns out, they used a blue screen. Then I was like, maybe green has enough blue channel problems to still interfere with it, but then I remembered that the Cyrene are just completely blue. I've got no idea. If there's any experts in 90s visual effects watching this, tell me your thoughts. They reveal coordinates to a portal where you'll find the ores and a crashed Supox ship. I'm not really a fan of how many of these things are just locked away until you trigger some flag to activate an event. In Star Control 2, you could just fly anywhere in any direction and encounter an interesting alien, so it felt a lot more like exploring. But knowing how much is strictly locked behind areas that are yet to appear, it doesn't make you feel like you're exploring nearly as much. There's still some degree of learning about locations through dialogue, but it feels much more scripted. After this, the Utwig will have their Ultrons stolen, and it's obvious that the Vux are responsible, because of course they were. You can fight some of the Vux to get back one piece, and then the Pekunk tell you to find another piece on some random planet, but the last piece is a mystery. It took me quite some time to realize that you need to threaten the Spathi multiple times to get information out of them, and if you're on that part of the story, they'll just randomly give you part of the Ultron. Also, you kick the Vux out of the Alliance, which means you lose those colonies as well. You'll also be randomly given a translation device so you can actually talk to the Dak-Tak Lak-Pak, which is, again, something that just happens seemingly without any of my involvement, and so now you can ask them some things. I actually like the Dak-Tak Lak-Pak. Their way of talking is interesting, and they've got an ironic sense of superiority about them, even though they're rather easy to dupe. Also, it's just really fun to say Dak-Tak Lak-Pak. At this point of the game, you'll have some colonies, have discovered most of the races, and have enough fuel to explore without too much of a headache. This is where it started feeling more like Star Control 2, though that's mostly because I was able to stop engaging with its other mechanics and it was stripped down to an adventure game. But after asking around enough, you'll realize that the Doogs were deceived by the Ploxus to remain in eternal debt, and the harder they work, the more debt they accumulate. You can recruit them to your side simply by paying off their debts, and suddenly you've got a colony with an insane amount of fuel on your side, making the other colonies you set up basically worthless in comparison. If you pay them all off, they'll give you an antimatter containment grid to contain antimatter, I suppose. The Katang will also brag about how the Crux managed to manipulate the Harika into joining them. The Dak-Tak Lak-Pak modified some kind of virus and purposely infected them with it, causing them to fall into comas and promising to work on a cure if they fought for them. They'll tell you where that virus was first discovered and where it's currently being kept, which leads to a cow, but it's not the cow, it's actually the sentient microorganisms living on the cow. The X-Chaggers were altered by the Dax to infect the Harika, and once you know this, you can start working on a cure, which your omnipresent human researchers will figure out immediately and remotely. When something needs to be done in this game, the humans will always solve it mysteriously in the background. You can use that to cure the Harika and the Yorn, and that'll get them on your side as well. You realize that much of the spirit of this game revolves around coaxing people into your alliance, but it's not well expressed. Narratively, there is some innate satisfaction in bringing people over to your side, but remember that the only thing we know about the galaxy right now is that it's in some nebulous danger. There's been hints of the Precursor's disappearance and the existence of some entity known as the Eternal Ones, but there's no connection between this and that. Overall, it's impossible to really visualize how the things I'm doing right now are serving the original premise. Genuinely, it probably would have been better if they dropped the whole intro entirely and just made the Crux the focus before gradually introducing the Eternal Ones. Regardless, the Harika inform you of the homeworld of the Owa, and it's around this time that the Dak-Tak Lak-Pak starts warning you that the Chimur are actually agents of the Eternal Ones and that they need to be bifurcated immediately. You can agree with them and do it personally, but if you don't do anything, they'll do it on their own anyway. But after that, I got stuck. Another star system exploded, and I investigated it, but there was nothing there to do, so I went on. The problem with these time-gated events is that I couldn't progress any further and I didn't know why, but you actually need to go there and wait at it until something happens.
These readings are incredible.
This triggers an actual Crux offensive, which is surprising because this is the first time you've seen anything more than 1 or 3 ships, and the first time the Crux has done anything directly. The combat got much better after I realized how to get rid of the isometric view, and that was after I got effectively soft-locked fighting a single Spathi ship because the computer decided that it would be really funny to run away and never attack. You know what, here it is with some Star Control 2 music. Let's see if that makes it any better. So I was trapped in that fight until I sacrificed my ship and could choose something else actually capable of killing it. Regardless, I'm able to take out pretty much all of the Crux with some Urquan Dreadnoughts. The game defaults to easy difficulty, and I suppose I could have upped it, but it wasn't really something I enjoyed doing. But after you defeat the Crux Assault, not much happens. In fact, I was totally stuck and confused, and that's because it took several in-game days before the game decided to give me the next hint on what to do when it suddenly said there was a distress call.
Sir.
It's very distressing for me to never know whether I'm missing something on a planet I'm yet to explore, or the game is merely waiting months before giving me the next piece of the puzzle. The Siren tells us that the Pekunk are having problems. Then the Pekunk point us towards the Exquivans as the source of their psychic anguish. The Exquivans are useless, as usual, but the source is from their planet. They say only one with empty mind can land, so you get the Siren to brainwash some of your crew with their psychic powers, and then you can send them down to check it out. They find a Precursor computer that's screaming into the void. The computer is screaming because it knows the true name of the Eternal Ones, and so you take that and put the computer out of its misery. After that, you wait around again, and you're randomly given coordinates to another quasi-space portal. The names of my saves should tell you everything you need to know about my mental state. Inside the portal, you'll encounter these things.
Crux savages.
The Ulk attack you, and then to prove that you're not part of the Crux, they'll tell you to go steal an artifact from the Dax. And so you do. Wow, that was really hard. I don't really mind sibilant serpentine affectations as a matter of course, but the problem is they put this on every single instance.
Trust. That is going too far.
Well, they'll tell you that a rock you got is valuable to the Claire Conqueror, and since the Chimera got bifurcated, if you ask them where to find another sun device, they'll just hand one to you. The Conch Rock is important to the Claire Conqueror's race, and if you break it, they'll be required to chase you to the ends of the universe to kill you. You use this to your advantage since it supersedes their oath to the Crux, and with them following you, you will lead them back to their moon where the Crux hid their queen, and with that, they'll join your alliance as well. I knew that she was on the moon because I bumbled into the Katang headquarters once and was able to get that information out of sequence. There's a lot of things like that, because you just end up gambling on stars when you're stuck wondering where to go next. They'll also tell you that the Mernherm parts from the Chimera were strewn about the Rainbow Worlds that the Owa covered in antimatter, because the planets are so good at holding antimatter that must be what they're for. And it's kinda casually dropped out of nowhere that that's what's causing hyperspace to stop working. Some weird fish things decide to do some illegal dumping on a few planets, and that's apparently enough to destabilize reality. About this time, you will randomly get a text from the mastermind of everything. You've heard of the Ploxus a few times, but no matter how many stars you check, you will never find their homeworld, and that's because there's only a few of them left, and they're all living inside the same Precursor vessel.
Greetings, little earthling. I am Precursor.
This is also the convenient excuse for why hyperspace is apparently broken, and yet occasionally other races will appear out of nowhere. To summarize the entire 30-minute conversation, he's got a vaguely German accent, is obsessed with dictatorial powers, and then gives a speech about how you should join him because we're the same, you and I. To be fair, back then, this trope was maybe only a tenth as tired as it is today. Unlike the Urquan, it just doesn't really feel impactful at all to talk to him, so this moment just doesn't have any real weight to it. I don't want to sound too down on this game. I mean, there are some aspects of the new aliens that I really enjoyed, like the Owa being so obsessed with valor and heroism to the point of self-destruction. And when you tell Owa Prime that you killed some of their guardians, they're actually proud of them and reveal that the Owa all store their genetic information in a central bank, and only after performing a usually fatal feat of valor are they allowed to reproduce. It's an interesting idea, and I don't want to act like Star Control 2 is above criticism. I mean, the Druge are pretty one-note, as are the Thradash, but it's thanks to the strength of the core concept that these things don't wear it down at all. By the way, after making a few colonies and discovering others, it is getting really hard to see anything on the map. There's this plotline where the Viro Ingo are so rude because they're genetically incomplete, and that's why they're so hateful. And if you get some DNA and give it to the Ulk, they'll mix it with some Vux DNA and reveal that they're actually two incomplete organisms, and that's why they're so xenophobic. So after reuniting their genes, they'll suddenly become friendly and apologize for ever being so rude. I've got to say, I really dislike this. I think there's something to be said about just having an alien race that hates you for no reason and just needing to live with that. It's interesting, and it leaves room for narrative intrigue, because characters like Admiral Zex wouldn't be as interesting if not for the usual behavior of the Vux. And so reducing all of that to a failure to be fixed rather than a feature to be worked with feels narratively cheap. Anyway, that'll give you the last piece of the Ultron, except the Utwig don't even want it anymore. It's a bit of the, turns out the true Ultron was inside of us all along. Which, even if true, also kind of cheapens their character. So, after getting the antimatter containment grid from the Doog and the antimatter scoop as well as the protected vessel from the Owa, you can find the Mernherm parts as well as the Mernherm Mother Arc, which is weird because the Mother Arc was said to have ceased functioning in Star Control 2. But apparently the Mernherm are constructs made by the Precursors, just like the Dax, and the Dax got corrupted or something. Well, the Arc is broken, and apparently the humans that are capable of fixing everything off-screen just can't do it, so you give it to the X-Jaggers and their microscopic size allows them to repair it. You use the Sun device, and the Chenjesu and the Mernherm are reunited once more. This tells you where the Ploxus vessel is hiding, but we can't go there yet because it requires some kind of special signal to successfully warp to it. We need to find every single rainbow world and clean the antimatter off of it, which means, more than likely, you're going to end up needing to visit every single star system in the entire game to find them all. Okay, and I mean, I've already mentioned this once before, but it bears repeating. The music is nothing like Star Control 2's soundtrack. I've been playing it in the background for accuracy reasons, but it sounds like they ran out of money and just had to hand the intern a MIDI controller. I mean, this is the theme of the main villain. It sounds like it's made entirely from default MIDI instruments. I mean, it's tolerable, but it just signals another area where it fell short from its predecessor. But yeah, Rainbow Worlds. It's around this time that you'll learn the truth of the matter. The Eternal Ones are powerful entities that evolved into pure energy, and to make a long story short, they eat sentience. Every few galactic cycles, they'll let the sentience develop and then come and consume it all, killing everything in the whole galaxy until it develops again. That's what's going to kill everyone. And I've got to reiterate, nothing we've been doing feels like it serves that fact. We've mostly just warped into someone else's backyard and started bullying them. The Dak Lack Pack offered to trade you something for the true name of the Eternal Ones, which you have, and when you do, they explode. But they give you an important device that was entrusted to them. This whole time the game's been hyping up the Precursors, questioning where they came from and where they went, but conveniently when you get this, the humans tell you that they've discovered that the Precursors are actually cows. Or togs technically, but that's the thing you saw when you first met the X-Traggers. So you take their cow, bring it to a special planet, and then you use the Undevolver. Behold, the Precursors. To summarize another extremely long conversation, the Precursors have survived multiple Eternal One feedings by devolving themselves to the level of livestock and trusting the Dak Lack Pack to reactivate them when the time comes. But the Dax this time have been a bit corrupted and developed enough sentience to be wiped out by the Eternal Ones. Terms like Precursor potential are thrown around confidently, but the actual implications are unclear. And a lot of this is to mostly legitimize the existence of sentience-consuming creatures of pure energy. Also, this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine in sci-fi, but they should have said sapience eating, or sophont for those not wishing to invoke a specific set of terrestrial mammals, because livestock are definitely sentient. The cow returns to unintelligence once again, and we're left scratching our heads at a solution. You can use the information from the Precursors to ally with the Exquivans by telling them that their strategy to seek nothingness of the mind is pointless against the Eternal Ones. And the Mycon were Precursor terraforming tools, so you can do a hard reset and get them back on your side. At this point you need to find a roaming Dak and trade the name of the Eternal Ones again, which confused me for quite some time, and this time get a missile. You can use the missile on the Katang headquarters and force the leader out of his power armor, which seems a little excessive considering I've scrapped dozens of their ships with no problem. But regardless, he surrenders and now they're allies too. At this point, everyone is your ally, except for the Spathi and any Urquan colonies you may have made, because they decided to paint themselves black and declare themselves Korah, which is a little amusing, but also totally against the Urquan's character. Although, as far as I know, there's no actual conclusion to this storyline, and so they're the only enemy faction left at the end of the game. Anyway, the Katang Grubs will tell you where to find some Ploxus ships that are capable of bypassing the disruption field around the Crux's flagship. And if you trade the name of the Eternal Ones for a third time, the Dak will tell you where you can find some living Ploxus rebels to pilot them. When you ask them why their entire race is a few elites, the Ploxus' excuse is that they were too tolerant and accidentally tolerated a group of people into dictatorial power. This is almost the end, and I'd just like to air out some grievances on this UI design with all the artifacts. Also, it's funny to me that they developed this sort of fleet design where you can dispatch individual vessels to certain planets, because not only is it completely pointless, but it's actually a feature that Fred and Paul wasted 2 months of development time on until they realized that it wasn't interesting compared to just doing everything yourself. The design philosophy of this game is inscrutable in ways that are difficult for me to truly express. It feels like all of these features were pointing to some central mechanic that simply doesn't exist. All the colonies, all the fleets, all the coming and going from the Alliance, it's like something was planned but never finished. It leaves the game stripped back to its most basic mechanics of an adventure game, but with all of the complexity of whatever it was they planned still left in. There's not much I managed to uncover about the development of this game, so we'll never know. And this isn't to imply that the aimless wandering of Star Control 2 was a masterful example of game design, but it was more streamlined, and that counts for a lot. With the Ploxus ships and some Ploxus pilots, we're able to bypass the whatever signal and enter the final area. And with the antimatter we collected from all 10 Rainbow Worlds, we can break the shield around his ship. He's a pretty sore loser about it, and then threatens to activate an Eternal One bomb and destroy the galaxy if you don't immediately surrender. When you don't, it's a fight. And despite everyone acting like his Precursor vessel is anything special, it folds pretty easily to a single Utwig ship.
If the Bloxits cannot have the galaxy, no one can.
Then he flies off, because apparently he wasn't bluffing. I think there was some indication that he had some plan to feed everyone else's consciousnesses to the Eternal Ones, but there's no way that that would have worked. I guess ignorance is an excuse, but it just feels a little flat for the climax. After waiting around and nothing happening, suddenly the Ors show up.
Expanding
with anticipation.
And it's like, I know they're probably evil, but they don't really feel that connected to the plot, because not once in this game are the Eternal Ones ever connected to them. But I guess because interdimensional nonsense is involved, they're invited to the party. This is the second time that you're forced to face more than 1 or 2 ships at a time, and they all explode one after another thanks to the Harika ship because it blocks their single-shot projectiles without issue. Again, there was a major emphasis on being able to make the ships in the colonies, but I never needed more than a few because it's trivial to clear all combat in this game with maybe 3 ships. And it's not like Star Control 2 where you'll get infinite encounters when you're in an alien's territory, they're just gone for good if you blow them up. Well, as soon as you beat them, the Ors just kind of give up and leave, cause it's not like they were really involved in this in the first place. I almost have enough time to establish a colony on each of the planets in orbit around the Celestial Core before the Arilus show up again. They're mostly here to explain what we already know, and that apparently the Ploxus' device simply summoned them prematurely. In Star Control 2, the Arilus' motives are much less obvious. They helped create the Neo-Dinyari, and even though one could argue that it was necessary, they purposely misled you about it, which is on top of all the other strange things they've been doing to humanity. Here, they are pretty unambiguously benevolent. After some more loitering, a portal suddenly opens. There's something to be said about these old pre-rendered cutscenes. These guys show up, and all of their friends.
Attention, sentient beings that inhabit Galaxy 2219B3.
They're simply called the Heralds, and apparently they're from the last time that the Eternal Ones drained the galaxy, which narratively I don't really like. It did mention the Eternal Ones evolved like anyone else, but simply evolved to a state beyond comprehension. Even so, I don't like such an intentioned approach to cosmic horror. That they would even bother assigning a race to herald the next feeding cycle is too scrutable for my liking. Again, according to the narrative, this was inevitable, and would happen regardless of whatever we did before, and so all of that stuff with the Crux just feels extraneous. The only thing that had any relevance to this plotline was the Dax giving us the method to talk to the Precursors. That's it. You'd expect a little bit more build-up for something this big. It would be one thing if we were forced to move into hostile space based on some information that only we'd uncovered and had to convince the local hegemony that we're all in danger if they didn't cooperate, but it's not like that at all. They knew as much as you. They failed to serve this central theme whatsoever, and the most egregious issue is that it's not a particularly compelling narrative to begin with. I understand, there's always going to be this instinct to raise the stakes in sequels. I mean, the Fast and Furious went from street gangs stealing cars to stopping supervillains with stunt driving. Star Wars went from a Death Star that can destroy a planet to a super Death Star that can destroy multiple planets. This escalation from galactic conflict to elder race that consumes intelligence feels like it's on a similar degree of one-upping the previous, and yet I think it had the opposite effect. The stakes in Star Control 2 were high as well, sure. I mean, even before you encountered the conflict, you knew that Earth was enslaved, but seeing that evolve into the eradication of all intelligent life in the quadrant if you fail is very real. It might sound narratively identical, but the mechanism is totally different. The Urquan are understandable, and what they've done is understandable. We're all presumably Earthlings here, so seeing humanity in that state is something you can connect with personally. Even all the aliens refer to you as human and remark on your status as fallow slaves as well as their own. It ends up coloring everything in the narrative with this implicit legitimacy, but here in an empty sector there is no such attachment. When it comes to having my sentience harvested by an elder race of cosmic energy from another dimension, I wouldn't even know where to begin to start making an emotional attachment to that. There's this assumption that these grand, sweeping stakes are better, but the reality of the matter is that the impact of such a narrative is built on the ground floor. If throughout the game we'd been subjected to aliens worrying about their imminent demise, that maybe would have legitimized it, but everyone's pretty sang-froid about it. By empathizing with those characters and seeing what this situation meant to them, it would have built up a narrative weight around it, but despite being presented front and center from the beginning, this everyone's doomed plotline might as well have not existed until the end. Maybe if you were the only one who knew about it and had to struggle to get people to believe you, then there would have been some consistency behind it, but everyone's pretty much on the same page. The Utwig and the Pekunk even comment on everyone being fated to explode, and they don't seem to care. There's only the barest hint of it in the main plot when you'd expect such a major revelation to be the center point. This isn't to say that Star Control 2 is absolutely replete with emotional resonance, but when it hits, it really hits, and that's the strength of having such a strong central theme. Ultimately, Star Control 3 is not a very compelling cosmic horror plot, and it's not a very compelling galactic diplomacy plot. It's primarily an adventure game from the era, and it shows. Once you defeat the Heralds, they will offer up their assistance and give you their Sentience Thresher, and when you look at the galactic core, it's a big... I'm not making this up, this is actually what they call it, it's a sentience silo, and once it's filled, the Eternal Ones will show up to eat it. I'm not making this up either. Your human researchers essentially take one good look at it and are like, turns out the Eternal Ones weren't very economical, because it's only 0.001% efficient at extracting energy from sentience. And despite being alien technology, they managed to improve it immediately with some of the Precursor tech you've got so that it'll work by just thinking really hard. As far as twists go, it's okay, but it really begs the question of why the Precursors never managed to do something like this despite being around for what must have been millions of years across multiple feeding cycles. Seems they really were silly cows. Anyway, you go talking to all of your allies now that the entire sector are your friends, except for the rogue Urquan, which is still kind of hilarious. And you get them to think really hard to fill up the sentience silo. It's kind of a heartwarming, everyone coming together moment. I actually like this kind of roll call for all the alien guys at the end, and though it sounds like I've been talking a lot of smack about this game, I have played much worse. For all its quirks and foibles, it does feel like they cared about Star Control and did their research. The dialogue was competently written, if turgid at times, and there's still a trace of what makes Star Control compelling in there. It's just unfortunately hidden behind a heap of fatuous mechanics, obtuse complexity for complexity's sake, and a plot that ultimately fails to resonate with the heart. Overall, it's just okay. You probably wouldn't regret buying this in 1996, but neither would it leave a lasting impression. You throw all of the sentient energy into the silo, the Eternal Ones consume it, and everyone in the galaxy is safe for another couple 100,000 years or so. And that's Star Control 3. Apparently the Eternal Ones inspired the Reapers from Mass Effect, but beyond that, its cultural impact was limited. And that's where the series was left. There was still interest in the Star Control franchise, and the fanbase remained active. Accolade actually had a plan for a fourth entry in the series that went as far as development and announcement. It was called StarCon, and it would have been a more straightforward space shooter in the style of Wing Commander, but it was ultimately cancelled. I'm going to be honest, from what little is available on it, it looked pretty bad, so it's probably a good thing it was cancelled. There was an alpha, but to my knowledge, no more footage of it exists. Also, this quote earned itself a repulsive laugh as soon as I read it. Accolade still showed interest in the franchise afterwards, but any speculation was cut short when they went defunct in 1999. Toys for Bop at this time, unlike their old publisher, was still solvent. Thanks to an enthusiastic intern, they ultimately decided to port Star Control 2 to modern machines, as well as release it as open source. Thanks to the open source format and many volunteers, it was re-released in 2002 and has since then been downloaded over 2 million times from SourceForge. However, the rights to the trademark Star Control remained with Accolade. Accolade was assimilated by the French publisher Infogrames in 1999, which then went on to consume Atari Incorporated in 2008 as well, before eventually rebranding to Atari SA. After several years of failing to meet expectations, the North American division of Atari SA filed for bankruptcy in 2013, and all associated rights were sold off for parts. It was there that the rights to the Star Control name fell into the hands of a Stardock Corporation. Mostly notable for their strategy games, as well as being an online retailer that predated Steam, they were interested in rebooting the franchise. In 2014, they announced Star Control Origins, and in September of 2018, it finally released. You might wonder what Toys for Bob was doing all this time. Well, after their stint of original games in the 90s, they mostly found success through movie tie-in games such as Madagascar. It might be relatively unglamorous, but it's honest work. However, at the beginning of the 2010s, and after being given access to some of Activision's intellectual property, they struck gold with their Toys to Life franchise Skylanders, which has since then grossed about $4 billion in sales. With a streak of success like that, you'd think they'd forget all about that silly little game they released in 1992, but it refused to vanish. Whether it was answering questions through an IRC, attending conferences, or doing open source releases, Star Control always seemed to live in the back of their minds. In Star Control Origins, you're the maverick captain of Star Control, Earth's burgeoning space program, when you're suddenly contacted by aliens and sent to check it out. This story takes place 43 years before the events, actually, sorry, it was supposed to. You see, these are not the Spathi, and these are not the Urquan, because despite the name, Star Control Origins has nothing to do with Star Control. It's more the idea of Star Control. That's because Stardock only owned the trademark, not the copyright for its contents, which had long since reverted to Toys for Bob. The copyrights were returned thanks to a clause in their original contract that promised that the vendor would return them as soon as Toys for Bob stopped receiving royalties, which occurred in 2001 as it was no longer being sold. It's possible that Stardock was unaware of this when they purchased it, because to be fair, having the copyright and the trademark being separate is fairly unprecedented. However, this doesn't seem to be the case. Rather, it's likely that they expected Paul and Fred to license out their characters to them as they'd done for Star Control 3 and the cancelled StarCon. They didn't. They were asked multiple times, but they wouldn't budge, the principal reason being they were planning on making a sequel to Star Control themselves. The result is, Star Control Origins was forced to create an entirely new setting from scratch. Makes you wonder why they kept the name Origins. It was only after Fred and Paul formally announced their intentions to develop their own sequel that Stardock filed a lawsuit against them. There was an attempt to argue that through purchasing the Star Control trademark, they should retain access to some of the series' intellectual property, and that Fred and Paul weren't the sole owners of Star Control's intellectual property. Though the crux of this issue seems to be who owned the rights to distribute Star Control 1, 2, and 3. That right had been in question previously when Atari had started selling them on GOG in 2011, which Paul contested and eventually reached an agreement with them to split. From a strategic standpoint, Stardock probably wanted the ability to sell the previous titles under the assumption that a new release in the series would draw some extra sales to the older titles. Additionally, they were potentially concerned that if Fred and Paul were to release their own game in the series, it would completely undercut theirs, which was now likely too far in development for them to reasonably cancel. I'll not bore you with the details, but the lawsuit went back and forth until finally settling in 2019, a full year after Origins' release. Seeing nothing but headaches on the horizon, Paul Ricci decided to call the CEO of Stardock directly, and after they broke the ice talking about bees, they came to an agreement. Well, it probably wasn't instantaneous, probably lots of paperwork, but, dramatic effect. There was also the rather unorthodox addition of a paragraph that compelled Brad Wardell to give the pair some honey from his hives in exchange for some homemade mead from Paul Ricci. Now isn't that sweet?
Good joke.
Anyway, Star Control Origins.
You think it's nice to meet me?
When I say it's more the idea of Star Control, I meant it, because it's basically a remake except with a completely different plot and characters. Same hyperspace travel, same landing on planets, same resource gathering, same 1v1 combat, same dialogue-em-up mechanics, same ship upgrades, and same system of celestial bodies. I'll admit, I did, as the kids say, pog at the hyperspace and starbase themes being remixes of the Star Control 2 ones. The story begins that instead of losing a war against the Urquan, humans were only beginning to venture into space when one of their innocent broadcasts gets intercepted by a group known as the Scribe. Similar to the Urquan, they have a policy of exterminating any species who might become a threat, and they also have thralls. Unfortunately for you, all those slots are filled. The Taiwan are a species of losers, which is the actual lore, and they warn us ahead of time, which kicks off our adventure into the cosmos to find allies. Just as soon as you finish blasting apart the Scribe Scout that spotted you. The first are obviously the Taiwan themselves, which is easy considering how desperate they are, but to get the others requires a little more work. The first one you'll likely go for are the Mu-Ke, a group of friendly cephalopods who also wish for peaceful cooperation, unless you're a fish.
Screw the fish.
They're technically thralls of the Scribe, but they have their own federation that aims to resist them. There's only one member currently, and they're not interested in adding any more, but you're free to apply. They might consider it if you help them out. One of their colonies is under attack by the Drenkend, the grunts of the Scribe Empire.
I'm afraid our orders do not permit that, at all.
They say if you can fend them off, they might consider it. The Drenkend are not your prototypical grunts, and that's because they only do things under orders. They don't appreciate dying, and it's kind of unpleasant being born from cloning pods only to be sent to your deaths, but they have orders to do it. As long as they're not ordered to kill you, they're okay with pretty much anything, though their vocabulary and imagination is limited. Unfortunately, they're ordered to destroy any unauthorized vessels in the area. The combat has changed somewhat, because instead of Pac-Man screen wrapping, the field is a set circle surrounded by asteroids that prevent you from leaving the perimeter. There's also wormholes, energy-draining nebulae, and power-ups like extra speed, energy, and crew. There's also the Captain's Window, which is the most important feature I could imagine when making a Star Control game, and the lack of it is probably why Star Control 3's combat just didn't feel right to me. There was an attempt to spice up the combat somewhat, but it's competing with a 25-year-old game. You're not locked to only a few set degrees of rotation, which makes aiming precision shots easier, but for better or for worse, it's the same old system you're accustomed to. I don't mind the combat, but with Star Control 2, it had the excuse of the hardware limitations. In 2018, it feels like the natural evolution would have been to take the fleet mechanics and allow multiple ships into the same arena. There's also been a general effort to streamline the game in a lot of places to modern sensibilities, and by that I mean quasi-space doesn't exist, and instead there's these ancient star bases all over that you can use and warp between since the beginning. The aliens that turned them on for you are the mysterious Arilu Lalile, which is really confusing because they're the only race that's from Star Control. They must have been given permission for them specifically, but I couldn't find anything online. Regardless, if they were going for the alternate universe approach to things, I guess they are the only alien that it would make sense to see here. After visiting the Drenkin's homeworld, you'll learn the reason why they're attacking the Mukei despite being ostensibly aligned to the same empire. It's because they have no ears. They're currently under orders to kill anyone that has less than 3 ears, and you might have noticed something strange about their third ear, and, well, stop asking about that. You can ask them who gave them such an idiotic order, and they'll tell you that it was the scribe, because no one else is allowed to order them around, but if it's the scribe, they've got to obey. They will, however, point out where they encountered this scribe officer. Ignore that gray box in the top left corner. I accidentally opened the console and couldn't figure out how to close it. If you go to those coordinates, you'll find a Menkmak, also with a weird thing on their heads. The Menkmak character is Watto.
Oh, it's one of those humans!
And I'm not sure I need to elaborate on that any further. But anyway, as it turns out, they stumbled across a massive cache of fake ears. It happens, apparently. With such an enormous supply, they needed buyers, and after coincidentally also finding a cache of scribe helmets, they bypassed the safeties, donned the uniform, and ordered the Drenkind that everyone needed to have 3 ears from now on. Unfortunately, they took this quite literally and decided to attack anyone without 3 ears, and to ensure that that's not themselves, they were more than happy to buy all the ears from the Menkmak. You can take that Menkmak with you, find another cache of scribe supplies, and return back to the Drenkin to get him to rescind the order. And they come out with 4 ears instead. But at least for the time being, until they can buy more ears, they'll stop killing all non-4-eared species. You can return to the Mukei and get yourself accepted as the second Federation member ever in history. Whenever you're jumping between stars, you'll probably be checking out the local planets. Compared to Star Control 2, there's actually a lot of extra areas of interest scattered across the planets, and you can see them at a glance with a little exclamation point. Sometimes it's a ship you can salvage, sometimes it's a little structure with some dialogue, and other times it's a structure with a little bit of story attached to it. There was a real effort to try and populate the lesser areas. Unlike Star Control 2, where finding something important merely by chance is next to impossible. Also, in my opinion, the resource gathering is actually somehow worse than Star Control 2. It was the worst part of that game, but at least there was some measure of skill in dodging the seismics. Yeah, weather was just attacks on your crew, but it was still something you could plan around. In Origins, dangers are just bars that go from 0 to 100%, and you just buy utilities that add resistance to heat or toxins. If you're under the required resistance, you just take damage over time no matter what you do. Sure, you might be able to snag one valuable resource node before you explode, but compared to Star Control 2, it reduces the granularity of the experience, which is impressive because the risk-reward was the only thing that the original had going for it. It makes a rather harsh line of, can you land on this, yes or no? If yes, you may now drive around free of risk. Okay, there are some robots and some fire-spewing things, but you almost need to try to get hit by those. When you're down there, you have a boost ability and a jump, but the boost ability is limited and takes time to recharge. I'm really struggling to understand why you would do this, because what's the risk? I mean, would it really be that imbalanced for people to drive a little bit faster while doing their busy work? It's also got a bit of a delay on the boost actually affecting you, and the whole thing feels a little floaty, especially when you get flipped over from crashing into something. Just let people boost around as much as they want, and then stop boosting if they want to make a precision turn. It's not like there's anything else to do down here. If there was more of a focus on letting you challenge yourself to clear the planet as quickly as possible, that could be some form of engagement. Hell, maybe you could give them a speed boost whenever they pick up a resource node and add in some sick inertial drifting. But it felt like it needed something. I mean, the tedium of the resource gathering was identified all the way back for Star Control 3, so I would have expected to see a little bit more care put into it, even if they were committed to reproducing the gameplay of Star Control 2. I'm not trying to be too hard on it, because a lot of this criticism applies to Star Control 2 as well, but one is from 1992 and the other one is from 2018. Ah well, going around you'll start to encounter the other species controlled by the Scrive, like the Measured, a sort of collectively intelligent coral reef that serves as their archivists and administrators.
Yes. What do you want?
They're the type that won't let you die without first filling out at least 10 forms in triplicate. Like the Drenkend, they've been genetically modified to make them fill their role better to suit the Empire, and it's also around here that you realize that the Empire might not be as powerful as it's making itself out to be. They're currently at war with at least 2 different factions, perhaps more. You hear that the Famished and the Pinthi are currently fighting against them as you speak, and eager for allies, I head over to the Famished homeworld.
Oh, goodness, guests! Everyone gather.
As it turns out, they're a pompous bunch of sealing worms. They're probably my favorite species from this game, and not just because they're pompous. They were originally vassals, focusing primarily on things like interior decoration, but have since rebelled. There's this really great escalation where you go to them, and they're surprisingly friendly despite their appearance. They might be pompous, but they're very gracious and well-mannered people, and then they reveal that they just eat people, and it's with the same grace and candor that they discuss everything else. Then when you bring it up, they're like, oh great, here comes the talk.
You aliens always have such dreadful hang-ups about this.
Turns out they don't really want to ally with you at all, and more than that, they're interested in eating you. It's a nice reversal of expectations, and exploring these sorts of cultural differences are the best parts of science fiction. Their ships are these hilarious abstract calligraphic sculptures, and they're actually the only enemies in the entire game that gave me any trouble because they do tons of damage to anyone nearby and heal. They hinted about having some knowledge on how they're planning to defeat the Scrive, but they only tell their secrets to their meals, so we're left empty-handed. With that as a dead end, we follow up on some different intel. The Mankmak have issues because their planet keeps getting eaten by a cosmic horror, with their current homeworld being named New Whatever Mankmak. The Ancient One is around the ruins of their old world, and it's a planet-sized monster that eats atmospheres. The whole space around it is swarming with space jellyfish too. They're trying to figure out some way to make it stop attacking the Mankmak, but the Gregroks aren't too happy with you getting close to the Ancient One, since they're natural symbiotes and are adapted to outer space. I'm not sure how they got into hyperspace, since that clearly needs a hyperspace drive, but I've chosen not to think about it. Anyway, they utter absolute gibberish, and only after encountering their swarms 3 times can you start to talk with them. They're intelligent, and though they don't seem to mind that you killed some of them before you were able to talk, they absolutely will not talk to you if you have a Mouquet in your fleet, which is a nice bit of reactivity.
They have stolen the Ancient One's egg!
Once you can talk to them, they'll tell you that the only reason the Ancient One is attacking the Mankmak is because they stole its egg, and if you go and confront the Mankmak about it, they'll be like, yeah, that makes sense. Their culture doesn't even have a word for stealing, and they've never given anything away for free, even if it's the cause of all of their torment, but they will offer to sell it to you for 40,000 RU. Alternatively, you can head to the planet that he mentioned it's stored on for no particular reason, and then take it for yourself, which is met by cheers from the ones guarding it. After patching all that up, the Gregroks decide to join your little alliance. It doesn't mean much beyond getting access to their ships if you want, but it's the thought that counts. I should mention something. I like the dialogue in this game. It's exactly what you want to see. It's clever, witty, measured, and manages to explore a variety of alien concepts. It's the main reason to play this game, and it does a good job of making you want to read more of it. Sometimes this whole thing of making videos on the internet feels like I'm just getting paid to play video games, at other times it feels like a job. When I was playing Star Control 3, it felt a little closer to the job end of the spectrum, but after getting through the first hour of tutorials, Origins was something I looked forward to playing. Eventually you'll be approached by the Trandals, these weird reptilian creatures that carry these computers around with them everywhere.
We can improve you.
They're on your side and offer to install upgrades to your ship free of charge. I'll admit, I was hesitant at first, but after discussing it some more, they promised that it would increase my ship's power as well as speed, and that really sold me on it. Unfortunately, it contains some kind of super virus in it and is trying to take over the ship, but it'll be fine. Eventually you'll find an outpost of Trandals who have escaped Overmind, and they'll tell you that it's some hegemonizing entity that entered this sector of space from the galactic core. The game hints that there's a lot of things going on in this universe, things far stranger than the Scrive, but regardless, that's the current threat we've got to face. If you help them out, they'll tell you how to remove Overmind from your computers. The help they want is, they have been under the influence of Overmind so long that they don't know any of their own culture. They have no idea who they even are. You'll need to ask the Measured where to find their homeworld, and after rummaging around there for a bit, you'll realize that Overmind was able to spread so quickly because it gained power over a few manufacturers and was able to bill itself as the hottest new commodity. Return with that info and you'll be able to free your ship of Overmind, and then armed with that, you can talk to Overmind again and try to kill it.
You actually tried to kill me.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work, but Overmind does thank you for making it aware of some of its weaknesses. It also says that the Scribe are the more pertinent threat to spreading itself, more so than the humans, and so it's open to an alliance of sorts, and that's how you get another ally. Star Control Origins has a captain's log as well as a list of objectives. You don't need a physical star map to navigate, and you can autopilot straight from the captain's log. I've mentioned that some of the stuff outside the conversations is necessary to cool down from too much dialogue, and that holds true here as well, but I don't know, it's complicated. I enjoy the conversations, but the solution is invariably to listen to all of it, and as long as you do that, anything important will automatically get updated to your log. Then you can simply click on any destination it mentions and autopilot there and get into another conversation that does the same. I'm not necessarily advocating for obscurity. I think Star Control 2 would have been considered a little obtuse if it were released today, but I think there's something about following a list that takes away some of the mystery and adventure. It kind of reduces it to just following instructions, and it feels like what set Star Control 2 apart was this sense of piecing things together as you venture out into the unknown. There were so many parts where they just point you in a direction and leave you to figure out the details along the way. The homeworld of the Slylandra was only hinted at from the vaguest, oh, there's something over there, I think. And the fact that they were in a gas giant, which you've probably learned to ignore by now, was so easy to miss. While there could have been more, and I do think 2 was a little over-reliant on the Melnermaid to give out hints, it felt a little more adventurous to be unsure. These days, the Outer Wilds is a shining example of what you can do with this sort of knowledge-gated exploration, and I would have liked to see the game lean more towards that direction. There is essentially no point at which you're wondering what to do next. Although some might see that as a positive, which is why it's complicated. There is also the sequential nature of the dialogue trees. There are very few instances where you're allowed to choose between 2 responses that result in different outcomes, and this kind of exacerbates the feeling of just being along for the ride. At most, you'll get 2 options and 1 sentence of acknowledgement for either one before sliding into the same topic for both of them. In these sort of interactive narratives, I think it's important to have non-repeating, exclusive branches of dialogue. Even if it's just small talk, doing so makes it feel much more reactive and involves the player more intimately with the narrative. The salient example today would be Disco Elysium. Of course, this is at the cost of writing time, as well as adding another few hours to the recording booth when it's fully voiced like this, but it makes such a major difference. The differences between simply clicking the next piece of unread dialogue and actually choosing what you would like to say is night and day in engagement. An example would be if when you first spoke with the famished, you were able to choose how you would react to their cannibalistic tendencies. You could either debate them on it or berate them about it. It's more immersive knowing that you're seeing that dialogue because you chose to. When the characters are king, it makes the players that much more attached. It also makes extra playthroughs more appealing to see all the other dialogue options. Ultimately, I think to be truly great, adventure games need to have the courage to allow players to miss content. This applies to Star Control 2 as well, though, and of all the things I'd wish to see in the upcoming sequel, deeper dialogue trees would be at the top of my list for sure. I actually checked their development blog and saw that they were using ink to script their dialogue, which, if you didn't know, was developed by the creators of Sorcery to facilitate its incredibly reactive narrative. So the aliens, the writing, and the dialogue were all engaging enough to keep me moving forward, but it made my involvement in it feel primarily passive. Anyway, we've still got a list of leads, and one of us brings us to the Mowlings. Yes! They're basically that sloth from Ice Age. At first glance, you might think they're just a dumb but devout species, with how often they bring up their god, but the twist is, God is actually real, and his name is Jeff. You can find Jeff just floating around in space.
Hello, I'm Jeff.
Though he's not necessarily a god in the strictest definition, he's a probe built by an unknown and ancient race sent to chart distant worlds. He could wipe out the scribes single-handedly if he wanted to, but because they're not advanced enough to pose a threat to him, he's ambivalent. He cares for the Mowlings because they're so stupid and so accident-prone that he can't help himself, but now he wants to move on. The Mowlings are all sick, and he wants to pass on the duty of watching over them to you, so you've got to go find the source of their sickness. It's pretty straightforward. They were visited by a writhing mass of sentient viruses and hugged them.
Identify yourselves, unknown multicellular constructs.
The Pinthi are bioweapons that were engineered by the Scribe, but in an effort to increase their efficacy, eventually they became sentient, and intelligent to the point that they started to resent being used as weapons of mass destruction. You'll find a lot of hints of races that were wiped out by the Pinthi, so it's a good narrative. The Pinthi feel bad about infecting the Mowlings, and so they offer to help, which ends up with one of your crew getting infected as well. Well, the good news is you can cure the Mowlings, but to cure everyone else, you've got to go visit the Taiwam and get them to rub all their mucus all over you, which they're more than happy to do, by the way. The Mowlings are cured, and Jeff is almost ready to entrust them to you. He also tells you to help them build a hospital, so they hopefully won't die as much, and that takes some special materials. There's a few quests that take specific items you can find on planets, and I think with some more work it could have been interesting, but I couldn't do this one because I'd already stripped the nearby planets of the materials it wanted and sold them. There weren't any more around either, and believe me, I really tried. And perhaps the developers saw this coming because you can just tell the Mowlings to do it themselves and wait a month. But with all of that, you've got the Mowlings on your team as well. The Muke suddenly decided to debate throwing you out of the Alliance on the grounds that the Taiwam interfered with the humans' natural development by giving you hyperspace technology before you were ready, even though it was necessary to avoid being exterminated by the Scribe. But as long as you've done a few extra quests for them and confer with the Taiwam, who are remarkably good at Muke law after being turned down for entry into the Alliance dozens of times, you'll be allowed to stay. They'll also give you a disgusting human meat puppet that the Taiwam asked for them to make from human DNA, which they will vehemently deny was a sex thing and claim that they only wanted to practice hugging humans for when it was time to meet them. Nonetheless, a meat puppet will be useful, because if you'll remember, the famished only tell secrets to the people that they're going to eat. If you head over to their homeworld and offer the meat puppet up, they'll be more than happy to talk to you through it. I do appreciate that you can just say your name is John Human and he just goes along with it. Though this does raise the question of why you can't do this with an actual human. I mean, it sounds macabre, but you can escape combat with the famished by offering one of your crew already, so it's kind of strange that you'll do it for no reason, but won't when it could have been beneficial. Well, I don't want to nitpick too much. After your little chat, you'll learn the location of the Scribe's super weapon, but it's around this time that a Scribe battleship will appear around Earth. They'll talk to you and tell you a little bit more about their backstory and rise to prominence. They'll give you some justification for their actions, saying that they tried peace, but inevitably left to their own devices, someone like you would open a door they cannot shut. You'll see this sort of narrative in something like the Zeely sequence, where an older race suppresses a younger one because the risks of letting them do as they please outweigh any moral scruples, and it can be a compelling narrative, but there's no delicate way for me to put this other than to say that the Scribe just didn't do it for me.
Time to die.
It's more than blind nostalgia that makes me say this, but the Urquan would wipe them out with 2 tendrils behind their back equivalents.
So, the offspring has returned to its nest.
You annihilate one of their scouts from the beginning with the most basic ship, and every subsequent interaction you have with them, their only response is to insult you shortly before you blast them to pieces. There's a sort of Death March-esque advance towards Earth, but it begs the question of, if they're the most powerful race around, why is it so difficult for them to simply destroy Earth? The most you'll get out of them is how great they are and how much of a savage you are, and so combined with the gameplay continually showing how ineffective they are, they fail to project anything but tragic arrogance. At the very beginning of the game, the Aurilu straight up say that they're not the biggest threat, and throughout the rest of the game, you get this feeling like they're in their twilight years. So it felt like this was leading up to something deep and sinister, and it kind of does, but they're still meant to be the primary antagonist. This might sound like your usual nerdy nitpicking, but if they'd shown any kind of competence, it would have added to their character. This is something Star Control II executed flawlessly. The Urquan were able to maintain their intimidating presence because they'd already won, and the only reason you were free to do as you pleased was because they were too busy protecting you from an even worse fate than their dominion. This kind of narrative rigidity is generally missing from Origins. After you destroy the battleship, which is apparently the best they can do despite occupying half the entire map, you can head to their secret lab, and if you encounter any Scribe there, all they'll say to you is, "You do not belong here, and you must be destroyed," which is especially funny when you head down to the planet and activate whatever it is that they were defending. Obviously things aren't as they seem, and as it turns out, you've accidentally opened a portal to the Death Dimension and let out the Ixraki.
Clever ones.
You'd think the Scribe could have been like, "Hey, don't turn that on, you idiot," instead of repeatedly insulting us. The Ixraki were an old race that the Scribe used in their experiments into other dimensions, and it's in one of those experiments that they were touched by something from far beyond and changed. They managed to seal them away, but not without major losses, and as it turns out, the Ixraki were actually behind the Taiwam helping you, as well as the famished rebelling against the Scribe and revealing the location of this gate. Also, it's kind of funny that the Scribe are always schooling others on opening doors they can't shut when they're the ones who messed it up in the first place. Basically, the concept of entropy wants to consume everyone in this dimension, which is similar but much better executed than Star Control 3. The concept of them existed in Star Control 2, even if it was in the background, so this sort of broadening of scope isn't unprecedented, and it's a nice resolution on the Arielu warning that the Scrive weren't the true threat. Alright, I was absolutely sure that despite underestimating you this entire time, they'd pull one big told you so, and then join you in trying to eliminate the Ixraki threat. It felt like the perfect resolution. The Scrive's weakness could have been written off, as you're forced to admit perhaps that there was some logic to their draconian measures. But even when faced with this situation, they'd listen to logic and join forces with you. The entire game was focused on gathering allies, much like Star Control 3, and so it would have felt appropriate. Instead, they just insult you like always, and then attack you. This is when I was like, oh, they really are just that stupid. Frankly, I'm not even sure how they got this far. Well, you're forced to regroup with your allies as more and more of the star map is taken over by Ixraki troops. 4 massive Ixraki ships emerge and start heading for your allies. And I'm not sure if you're required to kill them, but it seems pretty rude to ignore them. They're the most difficult fights in the game by far, and require you to take out several shield generators while they continually spawn killer drones. It's very similar to the Sumatra fight, and I've got to assume that that was intentional. I found the most success with using one ship to collect all the speed boosts and energy boosts on the field before going after the middle. I found the human ships and the Mauling ships the most effective against the shields, then once they were down, I switched to one of the big ships with very powerful and long-range attacks, since it's basically helpless at range. They were difficult enough that I was forced to restock on ships at the nearest starbase, but one after another, they all exploded. I do enjoy that you can check out the famished after all of this, and they're non-hostile and busy licking their wounds.
Hello, darling.
I've been saying reactivity a lot, and this is what feels the best in these games, because I didn't need to come here, I was just curious, and it's nice to feel rewarded for my own curiosity with some new dialogue. Obviously, this all comes at the cost of development time, and this is when I've got to say that, as nice as fully rigged and rendered 3D models of all the aliens are, I think a more economical approach would have suited the game better. It may have been the case when Star Control 3 came out, but the audience for these types of games aren't really concerned so much about graphics. Anyway, the final quest is to infiltrate deep into Scrive space and steal an actual super weapon. It's pretty much the same as before, and the Scriver is intractable as usual. There's a hyperspace gate nearby, so it's a quick jump back to Earth. Their newest weapon was another strain of the Pinthy, an evil Pinthy, and if being sentient super viruses wasn't bad enough, they were able to physically compel the ones they infected. The good Pinthy break them down and then assimilate their abilities, which gives me some pause, but in a good way, and then it's off to where you tore open a door into the death dimension. I will say, one little tidbit I appreciated was that it turned out we were so efficient at screwing things up that we actually managed to open the dimensional gate before they were all ready, and so the result wasn't as strong as it should have been. The fact that you can be like, just as planned, is peak humanity. Anyway, I guess similar to Star Control 3, you've also got a bit of a roll call of all your friends and allies at the end. After they're all here, they'll open the way to the final boss. It's basically the same as the other 4 ships you already fought, but has some more health and stronger attacks. All in all, I'll give Star Control Origins a soft recommendation. Overall, if you enjoyed the aliens and the scenes from Star Control 2, you'll probably enjoy it as well. I think it was a little over-eager to recreate the gameplay of Star Control 2, but understandably, it's a difficult decision to make. Star Control 3 was different, and it's remembered as a very poor entry in the series. It's easier to stick with what you know the fans will like rather than take the risk, but because it's got an entirely different setting, it feels less like a remake and more like they inherited all of Star Control's flaws while missing out on what truly set it apart, the settings and the characters. Though it wasn't as ironclad as Star Control 2, the alien interactions were thoroughly enjoyable. Well, that ship goes down like all the others, and after that, you get close enough to deploy the Psychic Pinthy.
We're activating the Pinthy dispersal module now. It's working, Captain. That light! Captain!
The Ixraki attack significantly weakened the Scribe, so it's implied that you took care of them afterwards, as you declare yourselves the kings of the sector. There were hints that this wasn't the real threat that the Arielu talked about, and there was a DLC I didn't play, but I don't think that it was addressed there either. Regardless, that's Star Control Origins, as well as every game with Star Control in the title.
Nice work.
Playing through all of these has given me a newfound perspective on just how special Star Control 2 was. It's incredible what such a small team managed to do on such a small budget, and it really shows what wonderful things can happen when everyone from the programmer to the artist are enormous science fiction and fantasy nerds. It's that kind of cohesion that feels like it's missing from so many modern titles. Technologies may advance and tastes may change, but a good story is truly timeless. Even all these years later, there's still a demand for a new entry in the series, but it won't be a Star Control game. I wish I could go back to 1992 and tell all these Star Control fans that their wish for an official sequel would one day be granted, 30 years later. Free Stars Children of Infinity is set to release sometime around Q3 of 2026. And I'll admit, I made this video now because it was originally slated for the end of 2025, but I suppose it wouldn't be true to its predecessor without going at least 6 months over schedule. The Kickstarter raised $600,000 in only a few days, and with about 6,000 backers, that's almost 100 per backer on average. That is probably the highest ratio I have ever seen for a video game on Kickstarter. And I can only imagine that half the people who played it in the past are salaried professionals now. I mean, I'm in that demographic. It's a shame that so few Zoomers seem to know about it, but maybe this'll change things. Fred and Paul said in an interview that they imagined that the next game in the Star Control universe would be what they would eventually retire on. They both left Toys for Bob, the company they founded, in 2020 to found their new independent studio, Pistol Shrimp Games. The studio they founded to create Star Control, they eventually left to continue Star Control. While it didn't start their careers, Star Control was certainly a beginning of sorts, and now perhaps an end to a long, successful career. It's remarkably poetic, and heartening to know that even after all these years, and though it may have been eclipsed by even greater successes, Star Control meant as much to them as it did many of their fans. Thanks for watching, and I suppose I'll see you again for the next installment of the Free Stars series, but, well, it's gonna be like 8 months, so I guess I'll play some more Factorio or something. Okay, bye.